Today we'll be pulling another One Mind Syndicate. I like doing those. It's so easy. If only I could have their pool, but it doesn't matter. The 13th Black Crusade. Original. Yeah, OG. That's how we roll here. 13 times shall the traitor king go forth, and the end times the iron fortress shall be cast down, its walls breached and its gate forced open. Those that dwell beyond shall spill through it. The air shall burn and the ground shall melt. The demon shall lie down with the machine. Brother shall slay brother with fire and sword. And the sky wound shall pour its malice forth. The eye shall stare unblinking at its prize, and the traitor king shall cross the bridge of stars. He shall return to finish the warmonger's red work. Upon holy soil shall the fate of man be decided. The Liber Malefact. Let's begin then. The 13th Black Crusade of Abbadon the Despoiler, that began in the 999th year of the 41st millennium, resulted in the largest clash between Imperial and Chaos forces seen in the Milky Way since the Horus Heresy, 10,000 Terran years before. Abbadon raised the greatest army in service to the Chaos gods since the time of Horus, and intended to bring an end to the long war by driving on Terra, slaying the Emperor of Mankind upon his golden throne, and at last completing the task the traitor legions had begun millennia before. During this great campaign, at least one of the remaining black stone fortresses, still in the hands of Abbadon the Despoiler, was destroyed by Necron raiders, since they were weapons crafted by the Old Ones that were originally intended to destroy the Necrons, enslaved star gods. The Catan. The 13th Black Crusade began as the in-game background to the 2003 worldwide Warhammer 40k Eye of Terror campaign. At the time, it resulted in a minor victory for the forces of Chaos. This temporary conclusion provided the War Master of Chaos Undivided, Abbadon the Despoiler of the Black Legion, and his chaotic allies the territorial foothold they had long sought within the Cadian Gate, though the servants of the Dark Gods suffered grievous losses to their naval war fleet. For several solar months after the pause in major combat operations, the surface of the fortress world of Cadia was largely controlled by the forces of Chaos, while the skies above Cadia were almost entirely ruled by the Lord Admiral Quarren and the Gothic and Solar battle fleet groups, as well as fleet elements from several chapters of Space Marines. Thus, for a brief time, it seemed that the ultimate result of the 13th Black Crusade was a stalemate between the forces of the Emperor and the ruinous powers. Having both space and air superiority provided a significant advantage to the Imperial forces, allowing the deployment of fresh troops and continuous bombardment of Abbadon's trapped army on Cadia. In 2017, Games Workshop decided to pursue a different storyline than the stalemate that had emerged from the original 2003 worldwide campaign, and the course of the 13th Black Crusade was retconned along a different path. And, the one where Cadia goes boom, thanks to Abbadon just shoving a blackstone fortress in it. Nice. Well, at least that's an interesting outcome. The Gothic War's outcome. While the great storm of the heresy, the forces of the true gods will descend upon the false emperor's minions. The stars will tremble at their passage. The mighty armadas of the war masters will bring annihilation to 100 worlds. Great shall be the slaughter, most pleasing shall be the flow of blood. The fools who follow the emperor will be brought low, forced to their knees amidst the corpses of their families and friends. The thrice cursed one shall become as a living god. The power to destroy the weakling emperor shall be within his grasp. Know this, for these things will come to pass, and the galaxy itself will be the spoils of victory. Constance the prophetess, burned as a heretic in the 356th year of the 38th millennium. To understand the full course and impact of the 13th Black Crusade upon the galaxy, it is first necessary to retell the tale of Abbadon the Despoiler's 12th Black Crusade, better known in Imperial records as the Gothic War, Like many sector-wide conflicts with the arch-enemy, the chaotic war began slowly, with sporadic chaotic raids against smaller imperial outposts in the year 138 of the 41st millennium. Vessels whose crews had been stricken with diseases sacred to the plague lord Nergal were discovered adrift in the Athena sector of the Segmentum Obscurus. At least it's not the Ultima Segmentum. Along with sightings of the Chaos warship Plague Claw, and astropaths began reporting the unsettling disturbance in the warp that slowly cut off the Gothic sector of the Segmentum Obscurus from the rest of Imperial space. Panic and anarchy became widespread in the galactic sector as fanatical religious sects arose, believing that the Emperor was displeased with them. Hysteria spread throughout the sector, and on many Imperial worlds, order broke down completely. The Imperial Navy lost several starships to accidents, and space docks that were subsequently blamed on poor maintenance and faulty ammunition. A rather too convenient explanation for many. 3 standard years after the first Chaos raid on the Imperial listening post at Orks, in the 152nd year of the 41st millennium, the forces of Abbadon the Despoiler, the War Master of the Black Legion and leader of the allied forces of Chaos Undivided, struck out at the Gothic sector from the Eye of Terror. Abbadon's Chaos Warfleet struck at a dozen Imperial bases and sent the warships. Yes, ships of war. No, Abbadon's Chaos Warfleet struck at a dozen Imperial bases and sent the warships of the Imperial Navy's Battlefleet Gothic reeling. Chaotic starships attacked all across the Gothic sector, and the first inkling of Abbadon's true intention in launching the 12th Black Crusade against the sector was to come to light in the Rebo system. I was about to say the Rambo system. In the Rebo system, where one of the mysterious Xenos Blackstone fortresses orbited the 5th planet. These massive edifices of unknown alien origin had been refitted by the Imperium to serve as orbital bases for the starships of the Battlefleet Gothic. For the first time in the history of the Imperium, one of these fortresses fell to Abbadon's forces, and he was soon to make horrifying use of the captured base's advanced alien technology. Abbadon's fleet possessed a devastating weapon, never before seen by the Imperium in the hands of the forces of Chaos, called the Planet Killer. You know, like the Death Star? Yeah, Planet Killer. Its name was not simply born from the arrogance of its Dark Mechanicus builders, but was a well-deserved epithet, as Abbadon demonstrated at the cardinal world of Savaven. The account of the utter destruction of Savaven, as witnessed by Jeremiah Soldagen, Savaven's orbital defense commander, still has the power to chill one's soul. His description of the entire continent splitting apart, burning skies, and the planet breaking up into pieces in solemn reading. 14 million people died within a single solar hour, and the crippling effects of this on imperial morale at the time should not be underestimated. Many worlds were hurried, though unfortunately not always entirely, evacuated before the Planet Killer arrived. Another Blackstone fortress fell to chaos at the world of Brinaga, at Fularis II. Abbadon was to demonstrate the true power of these ancient Xenos constructs. Exact information regarding the incident remains sketchy in Imperial records, but the evidence points to a massive energy beam being unleashed from the Blackstone fortress that scoured Fularis II bare, stripping its atmosphere and transforming its surface into a barren rocky plain. Imperial forces were continually engaged throughout the Gothic sector, from the Hammerhead Deeps to the Cyclops Cluster, desperate to halt the might of the Chaos Warfleet's Black Crusade. At the beginning of the 151 year of the 41st millennium, Lord High Admiral Cornelius Ravensburg, the Imperial Navy flag officer in command of Battlefleet Gothic, took the fight to the enemy, resulting in the clash at the Battle of Gethsemane, where he was able to utterly destroy a Chaos war fleet of considerable size. Eldar vessels also fought in this battle, though many Imperial historians believe their role to have been minimal. The evidence indicates that the Eldars' involvement against the force of Chaos was considerable during the later stages of the Gothic War through the use of their webway warp gates. News of this great victory invigorated the Imperial Navy, and as the warp storms that had isolated the Gothic sector for over a solar decade began to abate, as the Dark Gods grew wrathful and capricious at their forces' defeat, Imperial vessels from neighboring sectors were finally able to reinforce the Lord Admiral's bloodied battlefield Gothic. Abbadon then brought the full power of the Blackstone fortress he had captured to bear on the Star of Tarantis, the mustering point for the new Imperial starships entering the Gothic sector, an attempt to stem Battlefleet Gothic's reinforcements. Combining their power, the Blackstone destabilized the Tarantis star and caused it to go nova, destroying everything still within the star system in a spectacular fashion. The final battle of the Gothic War was fought at the world of Schindelegeist, where the Imperial Blackstone 5 still floated in the depths of space. A trap was sprung by the Lord Admiral and the Eldar, who defeated Abbadon's greatest war fleet in a truly magnificent 3-solar-day-long battle. In an act of spite, Abbadon sought to destroy the star there also, and had it not been for the sacrifice of Captain Abridal on the Flame of Purity, the victory could have proved a hollow one. Abbadon had been defeated, though he escaped back into the Eye of Terror with 2 of his captured Blackstone fortresses. Various sources claimed at the time that they must have been destroyed. Unfortunately, as the 13th Black Crusade would demonstrate, this was merely wishful thinking on the part of the Imperium. The Plague of Typhus. That's going to be a good one. As the end of the 41st millennium drew closer, the first signs that Abbadon's next long-feared assault was imminent came in the form of numerous sightings of drifting vessels emerging from the warp in the sector of Imperial space surrounding the Eye of Terror and the Sanctum Obscurus. The astropathic station at Belisar Majoris was the first to report that it had detected a large number of space hulks approaching the outer reaches of the Belisar and Agrippina systems. The first indication were that the majority of these hulks were uninhabited, but this turned out to be wrong. Estimates also placed these vessels converging on multiple vectors for the core planets of each subsector of the Agrippina sector. While the sheer number of space hulks suddenly emerging out of the warp at this time was rare, it was not exceptional. In response to this alarming report, Marshal Helk, the commander-in-chief of the Imperial Guard's 2nd Army Group, ordered deployment of additional troops aboard the 340th and 401st Naval Interdiction Squadrons, with a view to affecting boarding operation on those hulks suspected of harboring life. The commissariat tripled attachment levels to these units, and all higher command ranks were informed of the possibility that these vessels might carry the taint of the warp. The vessels of the Adeptus Astartes boarded those hulks that they could, but the numbers were limited as always. The Space Marines found these hulks to be chaos-twisted and disease-ridden nightmares, and subsequently, every such vessel encountered was destroyed with torpedoes and bombardments by macro cannons. But for some, it was already too late. In what could not have been a coincidence, outbreak of virulent sicknesses erupted among many Imperial Navy starships crews within a day of reported sightings of the dreaded Chaos starship Plagueclaw in the outer reaches of the Wart system by Captain Rourke of the Dauntless-class light cruiser Duke Lurstafon. As the sickness spread throughout the region, Imperial naval forces and the number of starships fit for duty fell exponentially with the disease's progression. And then even more space hulks dropped out of the warp, converging on vital strategic worlds. Ships from neighboring subsectors rushed to destroy the hulks, and a small ad hoc fleet was assembled at the vast orbital shipyard of the dead world of Bellis Corona, in the sector of the same name under the command of the Imperial Navy's Admiral Quarren. The Imperial fleet surged from port and began the hunt for the Plague Claw, though they were to encounter something far, far worse. In the shadows of the Ferenax dust cloud, the Imperial fleet was ambushed by a force of Chaos warships, led by the Terminus Ext, the flagship of the Herald of Nurgle, the Chaos Lord Typhus of the Death Guard Traitor Legion. The battle was short and bloody, with several Imperial warships crippled in the opening salvo of torpedoes, while others were overrun by vile, diseased creatures that vomited forth from the loathsome Chaos boarding raft. Admiral Koran, recovered well from his shock and rallied his forces superbly, counterattacking and fighting his way clear of the Chaos Warfleet's trap. Typhus did not pursue, and the majority of Koran's fleet was able to limp back to the port at Bellis Corona. The Battle of Ferenax had been a costly disaster for the Imperium, but there was much worse to come. During their return journey to Bellis Corona, thousands of Imperial Navy crewmen sickened and died, and only with the help of system pilots was the Imperial fleet able to dock safely. But if the situation at Bellis Corona was bad, it was worse elsewhere. Many of the plague hulls had slipped through the Imperial defensive net, and the same contagion that had struck down the Imperial starship's crews was spreading like wildfire through many inhabited worlds in the Cadian and Agrippina sectors, as well as those of the Bellis Corona sector. The hive world of Subiaca Diablo proved to be an ideal breeding ground for the unknown plague, and was quickly quarantined by officers from the Adeptus Administratum's Officio Medicae. But not before millions of people had already sickened and died. Within a solar month, a dozen other worlds reported cases of the same plague, and panic spread throughout the Segmentum Obscuras as transit between neighboring sectors was halted by the Imperial Navy in an attempt to stop further infection. As the epidemic spread, apocalyptic religious sects once more began to appear on every world afflicted with the disease, just as they had before the outbreak of the Gothic War, preaching that the Emperor's wrath had descended upon them and was a punishment for their sins of wickedness and vice. Only the truly faithful would be spared the curse of unbelief, as they named the plague, and hordes of flagellants filled the streets of every world adjacent to the Eye of Terror. The continued health of these fanatics in the face of the plague gave their words the sheen of truth, and millions flocked to hear their extreme rhetoric out of fear for their lives. The plague continued to spread, but it was on Subiaco Diablo that the true horror of the disease was finally revealed. To the shock and disgust of the planet's inhabitants, the mass graves deep in the ash plains of the hive world that contained the bodies of the afflicted heaved and split open, and the corpses of those who had perished in the plague climbed up from the lime-encrusted ground. Soon, millions of shambling corpses were advancing on the nearby hive city that they had once called home, clawing their way inside and attacking the already diseased, weakened inhabitants. Within months, plague zombies were climbing from their graves on scores of worlds throughout the Segmentum's Bellis Corona and Agrippina sectors. And Imperial forces were stretched to their limits in containing these chaos abominations, as well as mobs of flagellating zealots who burned Medicae ward facilities to the ground in their misguided attempts to stop the spread of the plague. Paralyzed by the sheer scale of the zombie epidemic, the Imperial Navy forces in these regions were completely unprepared for the vast Chaos Warfleet that emerged from the warp at the edge of Subiaco Diablo's system and surged into Imperial space. The Herald of Nurgle, the Traveler, Typhus of the Death Guard, had come to reap the harvest of his plague of undeath, and there was nothing to stand in his way as he climbed the world of Subiaco Diablo as the newest province in the Plague Lord's eternal kingdom of death. Signs Importance. A zombie plague known as the Curse of Unbelief slept through many imperial worlds throughout the Bellis Corona and Agrippina sector. Fanatical cults preaching that the imperium had forsaken the teachings of the emperor grew in number. They decried the sufferer's sickness as just punishment for their wickedness, claiming that only in the flames of purgation could the cure be found, and they would provide both. On the worlds of Malian's Reach and Leitar, imperial rule all but broke down as the plague crippled the authorities' ability to contain the rantings of self-proclaimed prophets of the end times, who whipped entire populations into frenzy of insanity. The ecclesiarchy had dispatched the highest officers of the imperial church to quiet the souls of the people. Yet, at this time of direst need, the Adeptus Ministorum had itself become embroiled in internecine conflict. A number of cardinals had cast their lot with those who preached that the emperor's judgment had found his servants wanting, rendering the synods of the sectors surrounding the Eye of Terror impotent and powerless to impose their spiritual authority when it was most desperately needed. Naval facilities and symbols of imperial rule were openly attacked, and over the following solar weeks, mob rule virtually replaced that of the administratum on many outlying worlds. Overpopulated hive worlds as far apart as the Scarus and the Cadian sectors erupted in violence, seemingly without cause. Even the higher echelons of the hive world Tabor and the naval bases at Bellis Corona proved to be riven with chaos cults. Charismatic demagogues incited frenzied mobs to fight the ruthless, crushing oppression inherent in the imperium's system of rule, and hundreds of thousands heeded their seditious ravings. Assassinations and poisonings heralded new eras of anarchy in key war zones, and whole supply fleets mysteriously vanished. Nemesis Teresa, St. Josman's Hope, and Leitar were all ravaged by insurrection. In the panicked streets of Thracian Primaris, one man alone had succeeded in uniting the desperate citizens against the evils of chaos as a raving prophet. The worlds of the Bellis Corona system underwent a massive recruitment drive for the Imperium Guard and the Imperial Navy, and priestly delegations stirred up the new imperial conscripts into a fever of righteous anger. In the wake of such catastrophic breakdown of imperial rule on so many planets in the sectors surrounding the Eye of Terror, vast disturbances were sensed in the warp, steering the already volatile medium of the Imperium into new and violent life. The fringes of Warpstorm Baphomet expanded to engulf the edges of the Cadian system, and many of the astropaths based there reported terrible visions and bloody omens that all pointed to a time of coming war. Reports kept pouring in, which indicated a horrifying escalation in the scale of these disturbances. While news from across the segmentum was sketchy at best, it appeared that a massive psychic backlash had caused the astropathic choir chamber at Belisar in one of the spires of Hive Terax to explode. The top 9 levels of the spire had been obliterated, and the death toll was numbered in the tens of thousands. Any doubt that chaos was in ascendant was cast aside following these events on almost every civilized world. Even on Cadia, the Imperium had seen signs of recidivist activities. So close to the eye, the Cadians had come to expect the taint of the warp to afflict those of weak soul, and they had learned to recognize and excise its influence whenever it was found. In one notable incident, Lord Commissar Salad seconded the company of Karaskin, assigned to headquarters security, and led a raid upon the barracks of the 92nd Cadian Regiment. He rounded up a cadre of senior officers who, he claimed, were in league with the agents of the warp. No evidence of his accusation was presented to the general staff, and there was no duty upon the Lord Commissar to do so. The officers were summarily executed upon the parade ground of Kaskar Orlak. That highly regarded officers of the Cadian military might have thrown in their lot with the arch enemy, filled many souls with shame, and confirmed the worst of their fears. A dark time was surely approaching. The voice of the Emperor. On the world of Lenitar. What was that supposed to be? Lenitar. On the world of Lenitar, a powerful figure had arisen amongst the raving cults and fanatics, proclaiming himself to be the voice of the Emperor. An orator of fearsome skill, this mysterious individual had roused the entire population with his passionate speeches. Many within the Cadian sector high command advocated the extermination of this individual, lest his outpourings lead to further unrest. However, all across the system, the backlash of those still faithful to the imperium began. The Inquisition's Ordos Cadia, the representative of the three ordos in the Cadian sector, believed the so-called voice of the emperor to be an individual of the utmost danger. Leitar was home to several thousand planetary defense force regiments, divided into 65 army groups, and it appeared that an estimated of 40% of their personnel had thrown in their lot with the so-called voice. Many of these units had deserted, a large number actually making it off-world, where they had dispersed to varying locations, including the worlds of Yayor, Amistel, Albiter, and Barel. That the imperial forces had lost such a body of men to a demagogue was cause for grave concern in itself, but it was enough for the high command that the Ordo Hereticus wanted him dead. Within a solar week, there was a great resurgence of orthodox piety amongst the imperial citizenry, as a reaction against the so-called voice of the emperor. Sector High Command had initially feared that the teachings of this heretic might plunge the region into the depths of apostasy. Yet the people actually rallied against his twisted followers, casting down his prophets and decrying his false words. His days were numbered as inquisitorial agents of the throne hunted the elusive voice. Though chaos and anarchy had come to a great many worlds of the Imperium, they still had reason for hope, for all was not lost while their faith remained strong. The great strength of the Imperium was finally stirring. The Cadian Sector High Command ordered a muster to take place at Cadia, upon the ancient and venerated Tyrok fields, so that the Imperium could begin the Emperor's work in earnest. Sabotage and insurrection. Several systems in the Scarus sector soon reported enemy activity, as did three subsectors located along the Cassandra Spar. Reports also came from Fossar Prime, indicating an attack by warriors thought to be of the Night Lord's Traitor Legion. The raid was timed to coincide with the local annual festival of the Three Maidens, a holy time for the population of Fossar Prime and its three moons, during which the adherents fasted and meditated upon their own weaknesses, the better to serve their lord, the God Emperor. Evidently, the attackers took advantage of the fact that most of the world's population were cloistered in prayer and descended upon the world's capital city of Medea, like a pack of feral predators upon its prey. Survivors reported that the enemy made planetfall at Medea's primary genitorium, destroying it and plunging the city into darkness, before crippling the metropolis's reserve power facilities. With the city's power grid out of action, the traders stalked the streets, killing wantonly as and when they saw fit. It was many solar hours before the planetary defense forces could be mobilized to face the threat, although many militia units mounted heroic improvised counterattacks, all to no avail. By the time the native defense force were able to muster, the raiders had vanished into darkness, leaving a death toll of many thousands in their wake. The world of Xerxia, that's a weird name. The world of Xerxia had also suffered at the hands of the enemy. A delegation from the Order of the Wounded Heart, an order militant of the Adeptas Sororitas, had arrived on the planet. Immediately after the Battle Sister's arrival, It was reported that a small force of unidentified traitor marines had been defeated when they came to the aid of a chaos cult that the sisters were seeking to purge. It appears the cult had chosen their moment to call upon the traitor Astartes with great care, hoping that the counterattack would wipe out the small force of battle sisters as they closed upon their target. It is a great credit to the Sororitas that they defeated both the cultists and the renegades, and the condemnation was passed on their Canonist Superior. Sector High Command also received garbled astropathic communications from forces in the Helotas, Sarlax, Vagera, and Skyren systems over the following 12 solar hours. Though no details were immediately confirmed, High Command feared the worst. The Ormantep Raid. The listening station of the world of Ormantep had also come under attack by traitor forces. The attackers were a small, elite company of Black Legionnaires who fell upon the listening post with cold, methodical brutality and cut down all they encountered. However, they seemed specifically determined to murder the astropathic choir that resided within the central keep. The unit of Cadia and Kaskir defending the station mounted a heroic defense that held off the Chaos Space Marines for several solar hours before the raid came from a totally unanticipated quarter. It appears that traitors were repelled, though by a force the Imperium has no record of. As the traitors closed on the hastily constructed barricades of the Ormantep's listening station's inner sanctum, survivors reported that the night was filled with a mournful hollow which sounded from all directions. As the Black Legionnaires faltered in their attack and cast glances in all directions, the rearmost were dragged into the shadows. Soon the Chaos Space Marines were firing their bolters on full automatic and emptying entire magazines into the gloom. As more were sent upon by an enemy, the Kaskrian's defenders could not discern. In only solar minutes, the Black Legionnaires were all dead. Their bodies were found savagely ripped open as if by hugely powerful jaws or raked by savage claws. The only evidence of this mysterious force that attacked them was the distorted Vox recording of the howls that filled the complex in the moments before the Chaos Space Marines attacked. It will later be determined by Imperial scholars that these mysterious saviors were none other than the long-lost Space Wolf 13th Great Company, lost for 10 millennia within the warps and the closing days of the Horus Heresy. Reports indicated a handful, at most, of the station's personnel had survived the attack, and they had requested a naval task force redirect to Ormantep to ascertain what exactly had occurred. All of this came at a time when civil disorder across the surrounding sectors and the Segmentum Obscurus had reached unprecedented levels. Now the Imperial forces had to guard against both traitors within and traitors without. Treachery. The Battle of Tyrek Fields. During the outset of Abbadon's 13th Black Crusade, an act of basest treachery struck at the heart of the Imperium's defenses. At the time, Cadia was alive within the diligent preparations of the servants of the Emperor. Regiments of Cadian shock troops were being mustered alongside the Adeptus Mechanicus Titan legions and Scitari. Regiments of mighty Tiwid feral warriors stood alongside the brightly accounted troops of the Mordarian Iron Guard. Amongst this mighty throng, faith welled strong, and the morale of every man soared to see the amassed power of the Emperor. But a vile serpent lay ready to strike. The regiments of the Volskani cataphracts had landed on Cadia to join the muster at Kaskar Tyrok. Yet, in truth, the troops and officers of the Volskani regiment feared to face the forces of chaos again, and even if they had not formally pledged their allegiance to the dark gods, they had decided that it was better to die in clean battle against men in service to a dark cause than to stand at the gate of the warp and close ranks in the face of the powers of hell once more. As the defenders of the Cadian Gate prepared for conflict, the traitorous Volskani cataphracts revealed their new allegiance to the ruinous powers when they unexpectedly struck in force at the Imperial Guard's troops being mustered at the Tyrok fields. The traitors slaughtered thousands of loyal guardsmen before any response could be coordinated. The intent of the Volscani's treason was revealed as they swarmed aboard the Leviathan Escubitoi Castellum, which served as the command vehicle of the Governor Primus Marius Porlaslak of Cadia. The traitors proceeded to slaughter him and much of their senior command of Cadia's armed forces. This included the commander-in-chief of the defenders of the Cadian Gate, who was killed in the brutal attack. At the darkest moment, then, Colonel Ursarak E. Creed took control of the dire situation, rallying the 8th Cadian Shock Troops Regiment. The bloodied Imperial defenders were quickly organized in order to advance upon the traitors. The 8th Cadian led the charge into the ranks of the Volscani. Creed and Yaran Kel, his regimental standard-bearer and most trusted friend, led the way during the counterattack, and it was they who reached the command deck first and succeeded in preventing the foul desecration of the fallen body of the Governor Primus. The governor had fallen, as a Cadian should, with a blade in his hand and heretics at his feet. Creed carried the body of the governor back to the battlements of the Leviathan, wrapped in the banner of the 8th Cadian. Many more Cadian regiments came upon the scene, and a great throng of them gathered around. Colonel Creed, being a pious man, allowed them to sing their praise to the God Emperor, and then, from his lofty position, he delivered his first exhortation to the armies of Cadia, to strive without rest until every disciple of chaos had suffered the same fate as the Volscani. The host demanded that Ursakar should take command. 3 times he refused the offer, but ultimately he accepted to the will of the mass regiments of Cadia. As ever, greatness thrust itself upon Ursakar's Creed, and he could and he could but strain to bear its weight. Through Creed's action, what might have been a grievous defeat for the Imperium and a nefarious victory for the hordes of the arch-enemy was turned into a defining moment for the defenders of Cadia. Every man and woman of the fortress world swore to repurpose themselves to the defense of the Emperor's realm. Preparations for war. Following the betrayal at Cadia, pleas for aid from Imperial forces beyond the Cadian sector had been dispatched to military commands in the surrounding sectors. Warriors from the lauded chapters of the Astartes Praeses and from the Space Wolves were expected to reinforce the beleaguered Imperial forces. Naval assets had been promised from Cyphra Mundi, and regimental muster had begun in many nearby sectors. The full might of the Imperium was gathering, but only time would tell whether or not it would arrive in time. That a major chaos incursion was imminent was now beyond doubt, but the arch-enemy would still find the Imperium ready, if only the preparations could be completed in time. Creed promoted those Imperial Guard officers he felt were worthy, and ruthlessly demoted or transferred those officers he deemed ineffectual. Though many resented his brusque manner, and he had undoubtedly made many enemies amongst the established Cadian officer class, many believed that his approach was a necessary one, considering the monumental task at hand. Though Cadian morale had been dealt a terrible blow by the betrayal at Kasr Tyrok, Ursakar E. Creed had rallied the Imperial Guard and planetary defense forces, charged with the defense of Cadia and the Cadian Gate magnificently as Cadia's new commander-in-chief and Lord Castellan. Though many senior officers had seen men who had fought 100 battles over their careers waver, a single word from Creed could galvanize them into action. The man was imbued with fierce resolution, and those under him could not help but be infected by it. The work of organizing the forces at Cadia's disposal continued at a rapid pace as the penultimate year of the 31st millennium opened. As was standard practice, each world contributed regiments and organized its forces into battle groups, and Sector High Command assigned Departamento Monitorum support services to each as they became available. Cadia was fortunate in that many worlds of the Segmentum Obscurus followed the Cadian example with regard to regimental structure, equipment, and combat doctrine, though there were notable exceptions to this rule, with Imperial Guard units such as those raised from the worlds of Feinherd and Mordant, with a starting establishment of 6 to 9 Imperial Guard regiments per battle group, and at least 6 such groups formed in an army. Cadian Sector High Command had been able to assign a minimum of 10 army groups to the defense of every notable world in the region, with the capital worlds assigned as many as 100. Of course, experiences showed that these battle groups would soon break down once they were required to redeploy to meet combat needs as conflict developed. And staff officers on the ground would need to organize their forces as best they were able. Such was the reality of staff work when one was required to coordinate highly diverse units over such vast distances. The storm breaks, and lo, as the veil is drawn on the last age of man, the despoiler shall gather his hosts once more. Where 12 times before the faithful have cast him out, now shall he prove their undoing. For man has grown weak, despairing at the woes of the galaxy. Where are the faithful now? Where are the men that stood beside our Lord, the immortal Emperor, and at his side conquered all? Gone. There are less than ashes in the cold, cold earth. At the 13th hour shall the despoiler return. All humanity shall tremble, for lo, his doom is upon him. The last oration of the heretic archivist of the Gethsemane Reclusium. Yeah, that was a nice one to say. With the worlds of the Cadian Gate all but on their knees with the weight of internal strife and the outbreak of the so-called Plague of Unbelief, Abbadon the Despoiler launched an invasion into the Emperor's realm and unleashed a power beyond imagining, the scale of which had not been seen since the darkest days of the Horus Heresy. As part of their constant vigil around the Eye of Terror, highly trained units of Cadian Karskin often pushed into the outer reaches of that swirling maelstrom, desperate to find some indication of where the first blow would land in the early 999th year of the 41st millennium. Astropathic divination pointed towards the blighted world of Wort, Urthwort, but it's a Wort, a world already taken by chaos, its population enslaved and sacrificed to the dark gods. Finding nothing alive on Wort, merely death and hideous plague zombies infected with the curse of unbelief, the Karskin prepared to withdraw. Suddenly, a frantic vox communication from the Cadian's warship in orbit reported numerous vessels advancing on Wort from the Eye of Terror. The Karskin attempted to fall back to their dropships, to return to their troop carriers, but it was already too late. The Imperial ships in orbit were either crippled or were forced to disengage and make best speed for Cadia. There was to be no escape for the Karskin, who were stranded on Wort as a massive vessel, larger than the most gargantuan capital ship of the Imperium, approached the doomed world, the Planet Killer. Few were aware of the existence of this monstrous ship, for it had been thought lost at the Battle of Carcos II during the Gothic Wars centuries earlier. Oblivious to their fate, the stranded Cadians could do nothing, as the incomprehensible power of the Planet Killer was unleashed in a devastating lance of energy that annihilated the blighted world they were trapped upon, and reduced it to spinning pieces of molten rock floating in the void. As Worth died, collapsing in itself, a Chaos warfleet composed of hundreds of warships and hulking troop transports surged from the depths of the Eye of Terror, heralding the beginning of Abbadon the Despoiler's fearful 13th Black Crusade. A psychic death scream, more piercing than the Astronomicon itself, ripped through to the ether from the doom world of Wart. Astropaths and forward Imperial listening posts detected the emergence into real space of a trader fleet consisting of hundreds of warships and hulking troop transport vessels. All were on a course for Cadia. Reports indicated that the Plague Claw and Terminus Est, along with a massive flotilla of Plague Hulks, had emerged in the Subiaco Diablo system. Worse than this, unconfirmed reports claimed that 2 Blackstone fortresses accompanied the Chaos Warfleet. Cadian Sector High Command found this last fact difficult to countenance. Though given the state of the sector in the previous solar months, they could not discount the possibility that these ancient Xenos weapons still existed within the hands of the forces of chaos. Imperial naval experts began plotting worlds likely to be chosen as targets for the planet killer's attentions. Intelligence gathered during the Gothic War indicated that the planet killer was a ponderous vessel, and its planet-cracking Armageddon gun took a great deal of time to power up and exert its effect upon a world once it was functional. The vessel was likely to be accompanied by a large fleet, which would be employed to subdue and distract the Imperium's own naval forces until the planet killer could unleash its main weapon. All available Imperial naval assets had therefore been tasked with locating such a flotilla, and system defense pickets were put on high alert for any signs of an unusually large Chaos Warfleet approaching one of their worlds. Nemesis Teresa. The wave of Abbadon's invasion soon broke across the sectors surrounding the Cadian Gate, and it became evident to the Inquisition fortress world of Nemesis Teresa was to be the main target of the first phase of Chaos assaults. This was first realized when the arch-enemy launched an assault on the Kinma Lomas system. Nereus, the primary world of the system, was taken by enemy forces with contemptuous ease. In the Cadian High Command's best reckoning, Kinma Lomas had not been a target in its own right, but had been taken merely to secure the forces of Chaos's lines of communication along the rocky conduit. Native defense forces, amounting to 17 planetary defense force army groups supported by the Imperial Guard's battle group Neth, contested the enemy's planetfall 300 kilometers south of the Nereus Delta. Going by the few intelligence reports on the situation they possessed, the Cadian High Command was able to determine that the valiant defenders of Nereus had held up an invasion force at least 15 times their own strength for a whole solar day. The last transmission the Cadian High Command received from General Neth suggested that he was prepared to sell his forces dearly. Having crushed Kinma Lomas, Abbadon's forces dispersed as they entered the Kensi Gulf, with splinter forces separating to assault the world of Ovaris Gulag, where no command communication had been received in over a solar month. The voyage across the Kensi Gulf to Nemesis Teresa was accomplished with alarming speed, with all elements of the chaotic fleet translating into target systems within a solar week of one another. A fleet of astro-navigators through the warp that the Navis Nobilate suggested to the Cadian High Command would only be possible with the aid of the darkest of sorcerous arts, while the enemy had chosen an inquisitorial fortress world like Nemesis Tessera as the initial target of its assault remained a mystery. Cadian Sector High Command's best guess was that the system was chosen out of sheer hatred for the most potent agents of the Golden Throne. That the forces of the arch-enemy regarded the destruction of Nemesis Tessera as one of the utmost importance was evident from the sector's High Command's observations and from intercepted communications. The forces of the arch-enemy invested an unusual amount of his resources in this assault. After the forces of Chaos made their landings, it appeared that the Inquisition's fortress might be able to hold. Yet Cadian High Command could only speculate that the icy surface of that grim world must have been infested with millions of traitors and heretics who had made planetfall upon it. They estimated that those who did not fall to Nemesis Tessera's inhospitable climate would soon be hunted down and exterminated by the blessed agents of the Inquisition. But soon, the Segmentum High Command came to realize that the assault on Nemesis Tessera, I hate that word, had been but a prelude to the even greater storm that was about to engulf the Cadian sector. Chaos advances. Let the galaxy burn. Abbadon the Despoiler, War Master of Chaos. Soon the skies above the world of the Imperium in the Segmentum Obscurus turned black with innumerable dropcraft as the dread forces of chaos began their invasion. The planet killer itself, Abbadon's flagship, drifted ever closer to the Cadian system. Terrible, mighty chaos space marines trod the surface of the worlds they had not set foot upon for 10 millennia, and their hatred and thirst for vengeance truly knew no bounds. The Imperium Navy, for long solar weeks, forced to fight a desperate holding action against the seemingly endless waves of chaotic vessels, was eventually reinforced. With their orbital defenses already breached and the fleet forced into withdrawal, world after world in the Cadian sector came under attack. Initially, the Imperial forces held, even throwing the enemy back at Belisar, Macaria, Vigilatum, and especially Xerxia and Cantrell. Yet the enemy soon found their weak point, throwing countless thousands of low-born filth at the Imperial forces, so that the Chaos Armada's real masters, the traitor marines, could exploit them. The Chaos war fleets continued their inexorable advance upon Cadia, only stopping to allow the Blackstone fortress to scour Demio's binary to a barren rock. Lightning arcs of incandescent energies raised the planet's surface bare, killing millions of Imperial servants and destroying every structure in a matter of solar hours. Chaos vessels quickly overwhelmed the orbital defenses of the solar Mariatus, the outermost planet of the Cadian system, and hundreds of dropships carrying Traitor Guard regiments of the now infamous Volscani Cataphracts descended to the surface, attacking the mining outpost and capturing the valuable ore refineries from the defending units of the 23rd Cadian Regiment. The traitor forces established a forward base of operations on Solar Mariatus, from which to launch attacks throughout the system. St. Josemain's Hope. The first of the inner worlds of the Cadian system to fall was the prison world of St. Josemain's Hope, whose inmates were believed to have thrown their lot in with the invaders in the vain hope of being granted freedom, following an insurrection stirred up by an organization known as the Correction Rehabilitation Movement. A possible chaos front, they were granted only eternal damnation, for the liberators turned out to be the renegade space marines of the Violators, warband, devoted servants of Slanesh, the Prince of Pleasure. Brutal, close-quarter fighting erupted all across the continent-sized prison, and many of the guards kept a last bullet for themselves rather to allow themselves to be taken by the frenzied inmates. Welcoming the traitor forces as liberators, the inmates were horrifyingly disabused of this notion as those allowed to live through the pleasures inflicted upon them by the Slaneshi servants were instead taken as slaves for the Chaos Warfleet or conscripted into its armies of traitor guard. Many officers within Cadian High Command had not heard of the Violators until they had been invited to a closed session briefing along with Lord Castellan Creed, where a representative of the Inquisition imparted to them the awful truth concerning these hedonistic heretics, so that Imperial forces would be better prepared to combat them. What they were told about the Violators' activities filled even hardened veterans with horror, for no man, no matter his crime, deserved to have the attentions of such vile creatures visited upon him. Soon the defenses of every one of the worlds in the Cadian system were sorely tested, and despite the efforts of the Commissariat to maintain imperial morale through censorship of news, word spread of the atrocities being committed upon St. Josmain's Hope. Following a solar week of disastrous events upon the penal world, the Lord Castellan issued an order the like of which many believed they would never be required to enact. The world of St. Josmain's Hope was to be subjective to exterminatus and destroyed utterly. The enaction of an exterminatus was beyond the resources available to the imperial forces present in the system. The agents of the Inquisition confirmed this and said that their own ships that carried the needed weapons of mass destruction were many solar weeks distant. Logan Grimnar, the Great Wolf, chapter master of the of the Space Wolves, also confirmed that none of the available vessels of his chapter fleet carry cyclonic torpedoes, and neither did any Astartes warship within range. The Imperial Navy put forward the plan of instigating a massive bombardment of the world using nova cannons, in the hopes of causing a degree of tectonic instability. But all available intelligence suggested that the chaotic fleets blockading St. Josmain's Hope's orbital space were too strong. The bombardment vessels would not survive to launch a single shell, let alone the 100 or more required to complete the task. Finally, it was put forth by the Adeptus Mechanicus representative that tectonic instability could be created by overloading the generatorium grid of the planet's main prison complex. The resulting explosion would pierce the world's crust, thereby causing a meltdown to sink through the planet's outer crust and into its mantle. This would cause the crust, followed by the planetary mantle, to tear itself apart. The only drawback to this plan was that such an objective would need to be completed by a team of operatives on the ground, for it could not be attempted remotely. A special team was assembled in short order, and given the moniker Strike Force Herald. It was composed of an unlikely mix which included Astartes from the Space Wolves, Hauling Griffins, Subjugators, and Iron Knights chapters. Three squads from 3 different Imperial Guard regiments, a Death Cult assassin, 5 tech priests, and a number of additional support personnel in addition to an unnamed pair of inquisitors. This small force was assembled in under a solar hour after the Cadian High Command approved the plan, and it immediately left for St. Josmain's Hope. 24 solar hours before the strike force was due to achieve its objective, the evacuation order was issued to those few forces the Imperium still commanded on the surface of St. Josmain's Hope. The order was given after Strikeforce Herald made planetfall. Following the issue of evacuation order, Imperial forces upon the planet began a fighting withdrawal worthy of the greatest commanders. Never had anyone heard or read of such heroism as was displayed during the desperate rearguard actions of that day. Regiments laid down their lives so that entire armies could escape to their transport. Even as those transport departed, men stood their ground at the overrun landing areas and fought to the death rather than board the escape vessels. So determined were they that their comrades should live to fight another day. The Imperial forces' plan was ultimately successful, and St. Josmain's Hope was destroyed. Unfortunately, none of the operatives of Strikeforce Herald survived their return to Cadia after carrying out this desperate mission to tell the tale of their own heroics. The green screen threat, because of course they were missing. With warp storms rendering astropathic communications erratic, the Segmentum Obscurus High Command continued to experience enormous difficulties coordinating command and control of its forces. Communications from the more distant sectors was particularly affected, and Imperial commanders were advised that those communications they did receive from distant sources were not to be trusted due to a psychodynamic distortion. A particularly implausible report from the Scarus sector indicated that in addition to chaos attacks, The defenders there faced the menace of the orks. After action reports cited the world of Mordak's Prime as the initial focus of a massive ork incursion, which occurred at the same time as the Chaos Assault was first hitting the segmentum. If this were just an isolated case, High Command would normally have written off the communication as misinformation, caused by inexperienced troops facing an enemy they had no experience with. However, every major star system in the Scarus sector soon logged similar reports, so they had to be taken seriously until more detailed information was forthcoming. Invasion of Cadia. First contact. On Cadia, Lord Castellan Ursakar, E. Creed led his Cadian 8th Regiment, now being referred to as the Lord Castellan's own, on an operation to hunt down and exterminate a group of Volscani cataphracts who, unknown to Cadian High Command, had escaped the chaos of the Tyrok fields and were attempting to link up with elements of Abbadon's invasion force. The Lord Castellan had always been known as an officer who would fight at the front line with no hesitation whatsoever, leading his men and setting the standard for his junior officers. The 8th Cadian brought the enemy to the battle at Kaskar Vasan, in the shadow of the Cadian pylon that dominated the Vasani moors. The battle was brief, yet vicious in intensity, and not a single traitor was allowed to escape with his worthless life. It later proved fortunate that Creed had wasted no time whatsoever in launching his assault, for a Chaos Space Marine force, believed to be the vanguard of a larger Black Legion warband, caught up with him as dusk fell, necessitating a hasty withdrawal across the moors. It was said that the true test of a general was the ability to disengage in the face of a superior foe, and the 8th Cadian regrouped to head back out onto the moors to face the Black Legion on more favorable terms. Following the evacuation and subsequent destruction of St. Josemain's Hope in order to deny the forces of Abbadon, of the despoilers, a forward staging point, the Imperial defenders initially rallied well, falling back in good order to key points in the Cadian system. Imperial morale was bolstered by a bold series of counterattacks, but these successes were to prove short-lived, and the despoiler had committed yet more of his diabolical forces to the Cadian system. With the forces of Chaos now fully committed to the siege of Cadia, the beleaguered defenders could only pray help arrived soon, before all was lost. Reinforcements. Cadian High Command would eventually receive word that the fleets of the Iron Knights and Imperial Fist chapters of the Adeptus Astartes had established contact. Lord Castellan Creed was also in conference with the Great Wolf Logan Grimnar of the Space Wolf chapter, planning how best the Space Marines might be deployed. Though the Cadian Sector High Command held no authority over the Adeptus Astartes, Creed had indicated his support for Grimnar should he establish himself as the nominal head of the Space Marine chapters operating in the region. Captain Ekion of the Patriarchs of Ulix, commander of the Ultramarines Honor Company, a specialized company of the Ultramarines that had been stationed at the Cadian Gate for many millennia, rotating officers and warriors from Ultramarine companies elsewhere, and also drawing from Ultramarine successor chapters, also voiced his support for this arrangement. Lastly, the Cadian High Command also received word from the Adeptus Mechanicus Temple at Kaskar Galand that the Order Reductor, consisting of an ancient and venerated siege engines akin to the dreadnoughts of the Astartes, was to reinforce the Cadian defenses there. More bad news. Unfortunately, not all the news that reached the Cadian High Command at this time was good. The situation on the world of Leitar had taken a drastic turn for the worse. In an attempt to bring to ground the heretic calling himself the voice of the Emperor, the Legio Ignatum of the Collegia Titanica, the Death Spectres Space Marine chapter, and the Yoran Dragoons Imperial Guard Regiment lay siege to that world's capital city. Soon after the arrival of these forces a large portion of Leitar's native defense forces and populace rebelled and took up arms against their government, slaughtering the planetary governor and his staff in an orgy of bloodletting. The Laetar security forces and the Adeptus Arbites reacted with commendable speed, breaking up suspected chaos cults and anti-imperial organizations. But once again, Laetar was plunged into anarchy. It concerned the Cadian High Command greatly that they were still able to control Laetar, even with the presence of a Titan Legion and a chapter of the Adeptus Astartes on the world. The rebels continued their actions, and the voice of the Emperor continued broadcasting his lies across the region. Many within Cadian High Command continued to labor on an analysis of the Traitor Legion's attacks. This task was ordered directly by the Lord Castellan, and had brought about a degree of conflict within the High Command, for Supreme Grand Master Azrael of the Dark Angels chapter heard of this endeavor and ordered it to cease, stating that the actions of the traitors were the business of the Astartes themselves, and were of no concern to the mortal units. Creed rejected this assertion as patently ridiculous under the circumstances of the current crisis, and Lorgan Grimnar agreed with him. As a result, Azrael soon withdrew with the cooperation of the Dark Angels. Azrael soon withdrew what cooperation the Dark Angels had been prepared to offer. Well, that's kind of bad. Chaos Vanguard. Multiple incidents of new chaos incursions continue to be logged within the Cadian High Command, the greatest number of which involved the Night Lord's Traitor Legion. Imperial analysts had reached the conclusion that this legion had been employed in a vanguard role throughout the early stages of the Chaos Invasion, and had been extremely effective in its mission. The Night Lords were notorious for the savagery of their assaults, as their predilection for inflicting wanton cruelty on all they encountered was well known across the Imperium. The archenemy was believed to have utilized the Night Lords in this role in order to foment panic in Imperial civilian populations as a result of the brutality of these attacks. The people of many worlds were consumed by panic, and their planet would be next. The people of many worlds were consumed by panic that their planet would be next to suffer at the hands of the Night Lords. While the Night Lords had been deployed to serve as terror troops, the insidious traitor Astartes of the Alpha Legion were employed by Abbadon as infiltrators. This particular force was one that the officers of the Cadian High Command had been briefed on by the Ordo Malus, who had considered their activity of dire import. It says import, not importance, so I don't know. Reports of scattered enemy attacks upon key Imperial facilities have been continuously received by the Cadian High Command, but these minor attacks had seemed to pale in significance when compared to the overall scale of the Chaos Invasion. However, closer analysis along with the information received from the Inquisition led the Imperial forces to believe that these attacks actually represented the work of the Alpha Legion. Further investigations revealed that a number of rear echelon supply and communication facilities were amongst the targets hit. One could not help but wonder whether these objectives were designed to hinder the movement of Imperial reinforcements into the region from further afield. The Emperor's children, led by the immortal favored Chaos Champion of Slaanesh, Lucius the Eternal, feasted well upon the agony of the population of the world of Belisar. The Plague Marines of the Death Guard stalked across the battlefields of the planet Amistel, the ground beneath their fleet cluttered with the unquiet corpses of those who the plague of unbelief had consumed. In the wake of these traitor legions comes the horde of the lost and the damned, traitor guard, mutants, chaos cultists, and human fiends of the very worst aspects who despoil the domain of mankind by their very presence. The acts of wanton destruction and desecration they proceeded to carry out in the name of the ruinous powers shook even the most stoic defenders of the Imperium to the core. War in the Void. While the war continued to go badly upon the surface of many worlds in the Cadian system, in particular St. Josemain's Hope and Solar Mariatus, the war in space was fought more on the Imperium's terms. The Cadian system had been the focus of Abbadon's primary fleet actions, and the Imperium's fortunes there changed from day to day. The situation was highly fluid, and the chaotic naval forces found themselves stretched to exploit the victories they had won. Although the Imperial Navy's fleets could not hope to oppose those of the arch-enemy in and around the orbital space of most of the worlds of the Cadian system, they continued to hold on to control of the inter-system space lanes within the Cadian sector. The Imperium could not under any circumstances afford to let their guard waver, for it was upon one of these routes that they hoped to bring the planet killer to battle. To let it pass was too terrible a failure to contemplate. A fleet the size of which had not been seen since the end of the Gothic War 8 standard centuries earlier had been dispatched from Cypher Mundi, and arrived at Bellis Corona, in preparation for a massive Imperial counter-offensive into the Cadian Gate. The arrival of this vast armada allowed those Imperial vessels that had been fighting continuously since the beginning of the invasion a brief respite. Severely depleted ships' companies were bolstered through indiscriminate press ganging, and hasty repairs and refits were undertaken on those vessels most in need of them. The Imperial reinforcements were split into battle groups, each tasked with bolstering the defenses in a specific sector of the Segmentum Obscurus. The regions around the Eye of Terror encompass many millions of cubic light years, and only by the concentrated application of resources in those areas in most desperate need could the Imperial Navy hope to make inroads and stall, and eventually repel the Chaos war fleets plaguing the region. During the later stages of the campaign, when Abbadon's fleet was seen approaching the agri-world of Lortox, the Ultramarines Honor Company distinguished itself with bold, spaceborne counter-assaults against Abbadon's fleet as the planet killer closed with that Imperial world on the outskirts of the Agrippina sector. The action bought Lortrax's planetary defense forces time to evacuate a significant portion of the population before the world was destroyed by Abbadon's horrific weapon of planetary destruction. The Ultramarine Honor Company managed to succeed in crippling the planet killer, but the massive vessel still had enough power to limp away. In the aftermath of the Lortox evacuations, the Ultramarines Honor Company redeployed to Cadia and the surrounding star systems, launching a series of operations to hinder Abbadon's forces as they assaulted the Imperial positions. These attacks included a series of highly successful boarding actions against the lumbering space hulks, being used to transport vast hordes of the arch-enemy's troops to reinforce Abbadon's siege of Cadia. It was a fool's dream to hope the planet killer could be found before it was brought to bear upon the Imperial forces. Without warning, it appeared in orbit over the world of Cadia. Though many could scarcely believe it, the world was destroyed by the massive vessel. It was lost, and with it, millions of loyal and faithful subjects of the Emperor, dead at the hands of the despoiler and his despicable weapon. Utter dread now descended upon the Segmentum Obscurus High Command. Despite the success of the early solar weeks of the invasion, many had come to believe that this war might not be won in the short term. Where at first the Imperial forces fought to repulse Abbadon's assault, to deny him footholds upon Imperial worlds, they now fought to keep him from overwhelming them entirely. This was a grim paradigm. And one the Imperial forces were not ready to accept. They believed Abbadon dare not destroy Cadia, as its pylons were reckoned intrinsic to the continuous stability of the Cadian Gate, which he needed to move his forces deeper into Imperial space so that he could launch an assault upon Terra. So the Imperium would make its last stand upon Cadia and hold that world no matter the cost. Enemy of my enemy. With every world in the Sector Oculus, sector surrounding the Eye of Terror, now embroiled in a war that had already claimed countless billions of lives, a new, unexpected faction suddenly took a hand in events. The ever-elusive ships of the Eldar had been sighted by the crews of many Imperial Navy vessels, and by troopers on the ground across at least a dozen sectors. In the depths of interstellar space, these Xenos warships reportedly intervened in battles between the Imperial Navy and the Chaos Invaders, on occasion providing aid to the Imperial warships and allowing them time to escape when overwhelmed, but at other times attacking them without provocation. The Dark Eldar had also been sighted, preying on the lesser worlds of the Cadian sector. They had even taken slaves on the feral world of Medusa, the homeworld of the Iron Hands chapter. It was rumored that a legendary Eldar faction referred to by the Ordo Xenos as Harlequins had been sighted on the battlefields of Agrippina and Schelus. The Eldar had also been sighted upon the world of the Cadian Gate. Cadian High Command had long been aware of the Eldar of the Ultwi craft world maintained a strong presence in the vicinity of the Eye of Terror. Though little was known of their ways, it was widely believed that they ultimately worked towards the downfall of the arch-enemy. Indeed, the Black Guardians of Ulti had taken a hand in a number of battles, appearing unexpectedly and without any warning upon the surface of planets thought distant from the Eldar activity. Upon Belisa Corona, Eldar strike forces had freed the Imperial Navy ground crews from the Chaos Legions closing in on them. However, there were also reports from the Cadian system of the Eldar falling upon themselves in fits of madness from the Agrippina sector, of the Eldar attacking the warriors of the Ultramarines Honor Company, and that their ghost ships harbored fiendish beasts of the warp. As ever with these mercurial Xenos, their motivations proved as alien as they were unpredictable. An ancient foe. The Ordo Xenos also informed the Cadian High Command of yet another threat from an unexpected quarter. The return of the ancient and implacable Xenos known as the Necrons, who had been found to be active in the Sentinel worlds. These soulless automatons were suspected to have lain dormant in some manner upon the Sentinel worlds for many Terran years, perhaps for millennia. Though they had slumbered right underneath the Imperium's noses, somehow they had awoken, most likely in reaction to the activities of Abbadon and the forces of chaos. In some manner, the Necrons were known to be the very antithesis of the warp, steered into activity by its waxing power. The Necrons' nature compelled them to oppose the warp in all its forms, and for all intents and purposes, this adversarial posture could be considered in human terms an utter loathing for chaos. Chaos represented the greatest peril for the Imperium, yet mankind paradoxically relied on the warp for interstellar travel, communication, and much more. The Necrons, however, received no such benefit from the warp. They had no psychers to draw upon the Imperium, and while their highly advanced technology provided them with power over the material universe that rivaled the abilities of the strongest psychers. In practical terms, this meant that the Imperium could expect the newly awakened Xenos to oppose the forces of chaos. However, this did not mean that the Imperial forces could or should treat them as allies, even in the loosest sense, for this ancient race was anathema to humanity. They were death incarnate to the entire species, who the Necron lords viewed as primitive interlopers within the rightful territory of their ancient empire. Lord Castellan Creed immediately enacted orders for all Imperial forces to stay clear of this Xenos race and to allow them to engage the forces of chaos wherever and whenever it was their intention to do so. However, the Imperial forces were not, under any circumstances, to render aid to these Xenos, for to do so would be the ultimate harm of mankind. The Imperium would not tolerate the Xenos, the Necrons' presence in Imperial space only so long as Expedus dictated. These ancient undying Xenos might be the enemy of humanity's enemy, but that did not make them the Imperium's friend. And trust me, it gets better from here. For the greater good, space commies, yay! With the Imperium committing more and more resources towards the defense of the Cadian Gate after 997 of the 997 year of the 41st millennium, Reports from the eastern fringe of the Ultima Segmentum suggested the Tau Empire was using this time when the Imperium's eyes were elsewhere to strengthen its defenses, and even enlarging its own domain in what the Tau called the Third Sphere Expansion. Though the Xenos had yet to threaten the Imperial worlds at this time and were largely expanding into uncontested wilderness space, Imperial strategos keep one wary eye on the Tau Empire, lest they use this time of conflict and uncertainty for their own advantage, to the eternal cost of the Imperium. The Imperium commanders were right to be worried. In the 99th year of the 31st millennia, the Tau initiated a major military campaign to seize Imperial territory in the eastern fringe that would coincide with the 13th Black Crusade and become known as the Zeiss Campaign. As the Imperium's military was heavily involved with preventing the breakout of the forces of chaos from the Cadian Gate on the other side of Imperial space, the Tau took advantage of this distraction to rapidly expand their territory. The Imperium responded with this dispatch of several units drawn from the chapters of the Adeptus Astartes to the Zeiss sector to blunt the Tau's offensive. With the victory of the Astartes in destroying the last major Tau forward logistical base in the sector at the world of Augura, the Zeiss campaign marked the end of the Third Sphere expansion, with the Tau Empire having grown to 133% of its prior size. Unfortunately for the Imperium, though the Space Marines had won the war and stopped the Tau's seizure of human territory, it was not possible to sanction a retaliation thrust into Tau-held space, as the individual Space Marine forces were required elsewhere in the galaxy to hold the line against the forces of chaos during the height of the 13th Black Crusade. Enemies everywhere. You would expect that. The Cadian High Command was also briefed by the Orlok Xenos on a number of other factions which assailed mankind as the forces of chaos battered at the doors of the Cadian Gate. The eldars were once again active in and around the Sector Oculus. Inquisitorial forces attempted to ascertain their intentions, for their actions appeared contrary and mercurial, one moment actively aiding the Imperial forces, the next slaughtering them. The Cadian High Command held no illusion that the Eldar fought for anyone other than themselves, and proceeded to plan accordingly. The orks appeared to be increasingly active in the Scarus sector. The Orlok Xenos believed the greenskins there had been building up for an invasion for some time, lurking in the unexplored depths of the wilderness space and launching their attack with the low cunning few would expect of such barbarous creatures. Lastly, the Inquisition warned the Cadian High Command to be alert for seemingly incongruous reports of alien infiltration in the region near the Subiaco Diablo system, particularly for attacks coming up from below the galactic plane. They will not expound further on what they meant by this, but insisted that the Cadian High Command should inform the Inquisition immediately should any such attacks by unknown Xenos materialize. Despite being beset on all sides, the Imperial forces and their commanders remained imbued with a sense of righteous indignity. If every damned creature in the galaxy was now ranged against it, then they were determined to take them all into oblivion with the last cry of the human race. Bearers of the Word. Tassia. Within the Malina Reach system, a new and even more dire threat had risen. The Dark Apostle Erebus and his forces from the World Bearers Traitor Legion were causing great damage to the Imperial efforts to defend their region. The enemy was of a particular insidious nature, as the self-stylized prophet of the ruinous powers sought to convert the people of the Imperium as much as to slaughter them. Spreading his foul corruption far and wide, he had managed to manipulate the Ultramarines Honor Company into an attack upon the world of Tassia, the fourth planet in the Malin's Reach system. The company hoped to draw Erebus to battle in the dark, methane-shrouded grooves of the planet's surface, but found that the Dark Apostle had instead drawn them into a trap. The World Bearers were far from Talicia by the time the Ultramarines arrived, who instead found a force of Eldar waiting for them at the site of one of those Xenos planets-bound webway transit portals to the warp. Upon making planetfall, Captain Ichion, the leader of the Honor Company, ordered his force to make ready for battle, but not to launch an assault upon the Xenos immediately. He had been advised by the Cadian High Command that the Eldar had on occasion aided Imperial forces, and though he knew well the duplicity of the Xenos, he nonetheless afforded them the opportunity to retire without the need for bloodshed. Unfortunately, the malicious Xenos were of a mind for war, and launched an unprovoked attack upon Ikion's forces. The battle that ensued was a prolonged and vicious one, with running combats being fought through the dark, vitrified forests. Death would come by stealth for both sides, and both sustained terrible levels of casualties. In time, Ichion ordered his diminished forces to regroup at its drop zone for one last assault upon the duplicitous foe, but in doing so found the enemy's positions abandoned. Upon coming to the Eldar portal, Ikion's librarian, Lesrus of the Sons of Gulliman, advised him that the Xenos had fled through their webway and were working to seal the portal from afar. Ichion washed his hands of the Eldar, determined never to give them the benefit of the doubt again. But due to the loss of so many of his brethren for such little gain. So it transpired that Erebus had not only skillfully maneuvered two of his foes into wasting precious time in futile combat against each other, but he had made use of the distraction of the launch to launch an attack elsewhere, upon the primary world of Malin's Reach system. Malin's Reach. The world of Malin's Reach was subjected to hell over a period of 3 solar days and 3 nights. Warp storms flared into being around the planet, shrouding its 3 moons behind a sickly violent haze, quickly followed by waking nightmares which racked the population. Many took their own lives, so terrible were the visions of insanity made real, and many more roamed the streets enacting wanton acts of carnage and madness upon each other. On the 3rd night, the word-bearers landing craft streaked from the tortured sky, securing a drop zone scant kilometers from the Ministerium district of the world's capital of Ruskin City. The defenders of Malin's Reach could only offer scant resistance to the traitor marines' assault, as they were debilitated by the ordeal of so many solar hours of psychic torture. The word-bearers fell on Ruskin's cathedral, committing such blasphemies that by imperial edict all loyal servants of the emperor were forbidden to recount them, save for higher-ranked individuals. Through some unknown means, the word-bearers were able to summon forth the creatures of the warp into the ruined cathedral, before returning to their dropcraft and departing. The imperial forces of Malin's Reach were sorely pressed for many solar days containing the demonic incursion, and the creatures unleashed there were only banished when Captain Ikion's forces arrived in orbit and obliterated the entire site with an orbital bombardment. It was the commander of the Ultramarines Honor Company recounted, the only way to be sure. Though a great many of the Imperium's forces present on the world were lost in the barge, along with a great part of the capital city, it was considered a merciful end for them. Such a slaughter was the terrible price of protecting the Emperor's domain from the remorseless demonic servants of the ruinous powers. War in the Webway. The Eldar Webway, the secret labyrinthian realm of the Eldar race, through which the length of the galaxy can be traversed in but a single step, was penetrated during the 13th Black Crusade by intruders bent on nothing less than the theft of its most dreadful secrets. Ahriman, amongst the greatest of chaos sorcerers, and the former chief librarian of the Thousand Suns Traitor Legion, has somehow gained access to the Webway. For millennia, this practitioner of the darkest of arts has sought this prize, and he intended to phantom the route through the Webway to the Black Library, the hidden craft world that was the repository of all the knowledge gained by the Eldar race over the millennia, over millions of Terran years on the subjects of chaos. The Black Library was a dark craft world that eternally traveled through the infinite corridors of the Webway. Its location and route through the Webway were numbered among the greatest secrets of the Eldar race, and were hidden from all but the Harlequins and the members of the Black Council, the governing body of the Black Library within the labyrinthian dimension. Like all craft worlds, the vessel was both sentient and psychoactive, hiding itself from all psychic probes while simultaneously repelling warp entities and other physical intrusions. The Black Library is an enormous construct with a scorched crystalline appearance, covered in veins and flourishes, but with the typical flowing grace of Eldar architecture. The interior is an intentional maze comprised of all manner of convoluted passages, corridors, and chambers. Bubble vaults full of stasis caskets containing forbidden lore and dangerous artifacts hang from the superstructure, whilst inside and above are myriad citadels, obelisks, monoliths, and spires where the rest of the craft world's arcane contents are kept. Such was the desperation of the situation that these guardians took an active role in the defense of their realm. For the Webway itself twisted and split like a living thing wherever Ahriman and his followers tread. Rumors of war beasts the size of battleships bolstering Ahriman's forces had implications too terrifying to contemplate. In response to Ahriman's intrusion, the Eldar launched a massive counterattack, the force of which bellied their woefully low numbers. The activities of Ulthui's strike force increased beyond measure, and a desperate running battle was fought across the Webway and upon the surface of those worlds that harbored entrances to it. As a consequence, worlds within the Eye of Terror itself were fought over, as previously sealed entrances to the Webway were unsealed in the battle for dominance. Eidolon and Belial IV were two such worlds, Crone worlds, long ago lost to the Eldar race at the fall of their empire 10 millennia past, and now vital to the survival of their race. It was rumored that one of the immortal Phoenix Lords, none other than Magna Ra, the Harvester of Souls, led the Eldar forces across the Crone worlds of the Belial system, and the ancient Eldar artifacts were unearthed by the forces of the arch-enemy. War against the Cabalites. Defense of Ex-Lucan 7. With the numbers of attacks by Eldar raiders increasing alarmingly, the Adeptus Astartes Command Council deployed a number of Astarte forces tasked with a specific objective of challenging them. It appeared that these raids were actually being conducted by Dark Eldar, the twisted kin of the Xenos that resided on the craft worlds, and though the Imperial forces held the entire Eldar race in due contempt, it was this faction which they decided to target in an effort to teach them the lesson that the might of the Imperium, although slow to react, was impossible to avoid forever. Aid finally came from an unexpected quarter of the well-guarded forces of the Imperium in the form of the Dark Angels chapter of the Adeptus Astartes. The Dark Angels, who had pursued their own mysterious ends throughout the conflict, had finally extended their full cooperation in the effort, acting upon intelligence passed to the Cadian High Command by the Ordo Xenos and relayed to the Dark Angels by Supreme Grand Master Azrael. 4 entire companies of the chapter and 3 of a number of its successor chapters, collectively known as Task Force Shadow Guard, stage upon the outlying Cadian sector mining world of Ex-Lucan 7. There, the Astartes task force lay in wait within the hollow mountains of the Kyrian range, every vehicle powered down in order to ambush a sizable Dark Eldar raiding force. Appearing out of nowhere through the Webway portals, the Dark Eldar made an extensive use of the sadistic Xenos. Appearing out of nowhere through the Webway portals, the Dark Eldar made an extensive use of, the sadistic Xenos wasted no time in launching their attack against the mining settlements of the Kyrian range. Task Force Shadow Guard revealed themselves and took the first raider force completely by surprise. Exploiting the momentum of victory, Task Force Shadow Guard executed a maneuver that smashed aside a second Xenos force. Unable to coordinate their assault in order to create a breakthrough in the Astartes lines, the Dark Eldars raiders were annihilated in a devastating massacre. The result was an outstanding victory for the forces of the Imperium that taught the deviant Xenos a lesson that they would not soon forget. Xerxia, since we had to come to this, right? The Imperial campaign against the Dark Eldars, though nothing more than a distraction from the maelstrom of the despoiler's invasion, soon posted another victory. Another force of Dark Eldar raiders had been defeated, on this occasion by the Relictor's Space Marine chapter, upon the world of Xerxia. The Relictors had not formally acknowledged the command authority of Longan Grimnar, Grimnar's Adeptus Astartes Command Council, and appeared to have launched this attack upon their own initiative, not as a response to Command Council directives. It was believed by the Cadian High Command that the Dark Eldar's raids simply attracted the chapter's attention, and the raiders paid for their crimes in blood. Xerxia was a well-garnished star system, and many of the Imperial forces present there witnessed the Relictor's assault. It was said that the chapter slaughtered 3 entire cabals, purging the system and hunting down every last Xenos before slaying them without mercy. The chapter's officers were said to bear arms of terrifying potency, swords able to spew cleansing flame, and axes that sucked the essence of the Emperor's foe from within their bodies, leaving nothing behind but a dried husk. The chapter marched under arcane banners and icons of tangible power, the followers of their enemies scattering before them. The Relictors delivered the Emperor's wrath wherever they passed. A number of Imperial Guard officers on the ground at Xerxia attempted to contact the Relictors' chapter master, Commander Artecus Bardane, but the chapter master refused to acknowledge their communications. Subsequent to this action, the Relictors appeared in a number of other campaigns before arriving in the Cadia system. The chapter was known to have participated in an attack against the warband of the Word-Bearers Traitor Legion on the world of Subiaco Diablo, during which an inquisitorial task force disappeared under suspicious circumstances. They were next seen in the Cadian sector, where they clashed with a Night Lord's force at Excelta Minor, before becoming embroiled in their suppression action against the Dark Eldar raiders at Xerxia. The chapter next appeared near Cadia itself. Upon their arrival in system, the Great Wolf, Logan Grimnar, issued orders that the chapter should reinforce the Imperial garrison of Cadia. Commander Bardane refused to acknowledge Grimnar's order, and his fleet departed the system, headed by best estimates for the agri-world of Fremas. Grimnar was furious that the Relictors had refused to submit to his command. In a fit of rage, Grimnar ordered his most elite wolf scouts to track down the Relictors and discover the true nature of their mission. Exactly what occurred on Fremas is a matter of some doubt, but a pack of wolf scouts dispatched by Logan Grimnar tracked the Relictors to the remote Diomedes archive, where the chapter appeared to have repulsed a chaos attack before turning upon the archive's defenders. None of the defenders were reported to have survived the assault, but Grimnar's men recovered partial video logs that suggest the Relictor's objective was the sealed stasis vault at the heart of the mountaintop fastness. The contents of this vault were known to but a handful of Adeptus in the Imperium, most of whom resided on Terra. Not Adeptus, Adepts, whatever. The Relictor's actions would later put them in conflict with both the Inquisition and later the High Lords of Terra, which put the future of their chapter in dire jeopardy. Preparations and counteroffensive. For long weeks, the Imperial Navy had been forced to fight a desperate holding action against the seemingly endless waves of Chaos vessels. But its battle fleets had finally been reinforced. An Imperial fleet the size of which had not been seen since the end of the Gothic War 8 standard centuries earlier had been dispatched from Siframundi and staged itself at Bellis Corona in preparation for a massive counteroffensive into the Cadian Gate. The arrival of this vast armada allowed those imperial vessels that had been fighting continuously since the beginning of the invasion a brief respite. Severely depleted ships' companies were bolstered through indiscriminate press ganging. Didn't I read this at some point? I think I did. Okay. Something press ganging and hasty repairs and refits were undertaken for those vessels most in need of them. I think they just copy-pasted this. The imperial reinforcements were split into battle groups. Okay, the regions around the Iron Compass. Lord Admiral Kuran, the commander of the Imperial Navy assets in Cadia system, has succeeded time and time again defeating Chaos warfleets, many times the size of his own, allowing reinforcements to enter the fray around the fortress worlds of Cadia system. At the same time, a massive influx of reinforcements and the Sechelus system of the Cadia sector had penetrated the Chaos blockade of ships and minefields, and in the Bellicosa Corona system of the Bellis Corona sector, the entirety of the battle fleet Gothic has stormed into the fray. Infernal mines sworn across the battlefront accounted for the destruction of only a few vessels in the fleet. And now, Battlefleet Gothica had the opportunity to avenge the losses it had suffered in the Gothic War at the hands of Abbadon the Despoiler's own warfleet. If the relentless momentum of the invasion could be slowed for just a short time, then the defenders of the ground would have a real chance of victory. The Imperial Navy had gambled all on this sector-wide retaliation, and should it fail, then Battlefleet Obscurus would be so weakened that only the redeployment of fleets across the whole Imperium would not hold any hope of holding back the Despoiler's invasion. This one was a weird one, but let's move on. Wehrmacht Assault. Lord Castellan Creed soon ordered the redeployment of Imperial troops defending the feral world of Sechelus to bolster the defenses there. Sechelus was firmly under Imperial control following the defensive efforts of Lord Marshal Attica of the Imperial Guard and a number of Astartes forces. The problem had been the blockade which the arch-enemy's warfleets had placed around Sechelus itself in order to prevent the Imperial forces from redeploying. To expedite the breakout, there was a planned push upon the enemy forces located near the mining world of Vermont. The Cadian Sector High Command hoped the vessels of the chaotic blockade fleet would be drawn off to oppose it. Simultaneously, a battle group upon the surface of Wehrmacht would launch a sudden frontal assault upon the enemy position, with the intention that the chaotic blockade fleet would be forced to ferry ground troops from Sechelus to Wehrmacht, thus complicating their departure. This ruse ultimately proved too successful, and reminded Imperial commanders that the reactions of the servants of the ruinous powers could never be fully anticipated. The Wehrmacht assault was a complete success, and that it caught the enemy unawares. It appeared that the hordes of Chaos cultists, forming the Chaos presence upon Wehrmacht, were engaged in some form of mass ritual, the culmination of which was disrupted by Imperial forces' attack. The cultists were caught unprepared to defend their position, and were cut down with negligible losses to the Imperium's own forces. As anticipated, the enemy began to move troops upon the surface of Sechelus up to orbit, and their war fleets waited for the troops' transfer to be completed before setting off to relieve Wehrmacht. At this point, Lord Marshal Attica made his breakout from Sechelus, leading 40% of his force to their own transport ships, and running the gauntlet of the remainder of the chaotic fleet blockade. Though a number of his troop transport ships did not make it through the enemy lines, a great many did. Enough, in fact, to render that portion of the operation a success. Indeed, the Imperial Navy could not possibly have hoped that such a great number of Chaos vessels would be pulled out of the line, for had more remained, Attica's breakout would have been far less of a success than it proved. However, 3 solar days later, the arch-enemy's reinforcements reached Vermont. So great were the number of chaotic troops ferried there that the Imperial forces stood next to no chance against them. History may never fully recount the sacrifices made at Vermont so that Attica's forces could reach Cadia. It appeared the Imperial forces had stirred up a veritable hornet's nest by interrupting the mass ritual there. But Imperial commanders could not help but wonder what evil might have transpired had they not acted. Xenos fleet activities. Eldar. The activities of the craft world Eldar against the force of chaos had ceased unexpectedly at this point in the conflict. For many solar weeks, the starships of the Eldar had been active across the Cadian sector, in most instances striking against the assets of the arch-enemy, though on occasion they had also attacked the Imperial forces for no discernible reason. Now, it was as if they had simply disappeared. Entire staffs of Imperial savants, seers, and strategos had been assigned to the task of tracing the activities and objectives of the Eldar, and were in constant communication with the ordered Xenos in this regard. Long-range scouts had caught brief glimpses of movement, but as the Cadian High Command had already learned, when the Eldar wished to remain hidden, there was little even their most skilled crews could do to find them. Progress was eventually made in determining the reason for the sudden disappearance of the Eldar fleets when an Imperial scout vessel managed to record traces of Eldar activity in system XT90304/G, an empty SAR system in the wilderness space, 30 light years to the galactic northeast of the Belis Corona. On the outskirts of the system, the Imperial vessel picked up readings of a vessel of prodigious size and managed to execute a single pick capture before being detected. The pick capture confirmed just why the Eldar had redirected their efforts. The forces of Abbadon were in possession of a black stone fortress, an ancient Xenos-forged engine of destruction not seen since the end of the Gothic War. As if the presence of the planet killer in the sectors oculus of the segmentum obscurus were not dire enough a threat. Now the Imperium had to contend with this new threat. If the notoriously aloof and uncaring Eldar were prepared to throw the majority of their forces into combating the Blackstone Fortress, the threat they represented must have been terrible indeed. Orks. The Orks continued putting intolerable pressure on a number of worlds in the Scarus sector, notably Letid II and Mordax Prime. The Magi Biologus of the Adeptus Mechanicus believed that these foul creatures to be working alongside Abbadon the Despoiler to further their own ends, though they did not consider it to be a true alliance as such. More likely, the Orks were taking advantage of the opportunity provided by the Despoiler's invasion to launch new attacks against distracted Imperial targets. The situation on these worlds was grim indeed. In particular, Mordax Prime could not be allowed to fall into greenskin hands, for it was a forge world of prodigious output, and its loss would damage the Imperium's war effort. More to the point, the Imperial forces dreaded the monstrosities the Orks might turn the production lines of Mordax Prime to creating. 15 Imperial Guard army groups and 5 legions of cybernetic Mechanicus Skitari troops continued to hold Mordax Prime. Yet clearly such a large body of men was insufficient to stem the green tide engulfing the Forge world. The Segmentum Obscurus High Command drew up plans to send a further 34 to 40 regiments of Imperial Guard to the world, drawn from the regional reserve to help bolster Mordax Prime's defenses. Yet the Orks had set their sights upon capturing Mordax Prime, broadcasting their designs for the planet they referred to as Mordaka Prime. That's just genius. On every Imperial channel, were not for the fact that Mordax Prime was the sovereign preserve of the Adeptus Mechanicus, Imperial High Command seriously considered petitioning the Inquisition for an exterminatus against the world before its vast resources fell to the enemy. The tides of war. By this point in the conflict, on every world of the Cadian system, there was only war. Vigilantum was all but lost to the unholy servants of the ruinous powers. though a small Imperial rearguard, previously thought annihilated, held out, stubbornly defending the naval attack Logis facility. Solar Maritus, too, was sorely pressed by the hordes of the despoiler, and the Cadian sector high command had ordered the world reinforced, lest its output of munition and other material essential to the ongoing war effort be lost. A blow the Beligard Imperial defenders could ill afford. With Imperial Navy reinforcements inbound, the defenders of Cadia had to hold out just a little while longer. Creed had been hailed by many as the most able Imperial Guard commander since the legendary Lord Solar Macarius. Yet many Imperial observers noted that his sub-commanders had not proved themselves quite so capable. So sudden and mobile had Abbadon's invasion proved that many Imperial commanders at the star system and planetary level had simply been unable to coordinate their actions, and were reacting to the enemy's attacks rather than dictating their own terms of battle. Creed had issued stern orders to his subordinates to take the initiative at the planetary level or fall to the enemy, for the choice was that simple. Though the archenemy had gained temporary advantage over Imperial forces at Vermont, the Imperium was now firmly in control of Seychelles. A number of cross-substantiated astropathic communications confirmed that the situation on that feral world was positive. Creed ordered a further 20 Imperial Guard regiments from Seychelles to be made, ready for transit to other Cadian sector war zones, an order that would be executed if and when the warp storm scarring the sector abated. But after long solar days of silence from across the Cadian sector, a single message managed to penetrate the ether. The Scarus sector fared ill, and its Imperial defenders begged that the Cadian High Command dispatch reinforcements with all haste. Only the industrial hive world of Thracian Prime stood before the tide of the Orc menace and the chaos filth assaulting the sector, and with each passing solar day, another world in the Scarus sector slipped further from the Imperium's grasp. It appeared that Belis Corona was suffering at the hands of the arch-enemy, and even the Imperial Navy was having a difficult time of it in this region. Elsewhere, the Imperial Navy battle group Eclipse managed to halt the predation of an inbound Dark Eldar fleet. Despite being severely outmatched, the Imperial Navy's vessels managed to cause the catastrophic damage on the weakling ship of the Dark Eldar, many brave crewmen giving their lives in this process. The Xenos evidently employ some manner of cloaking device, for at first the battle group believed them to be a previously unknown Chaos Warfleet. That they were able to defeat this attack was cause for great celebration, but the Imperial Navy knew it had to increase its vigilance tenfold against further incursion. Fall of Ibrium. Abbadon soon unleashed a new and calamitous phase in his invasion. One of his allies, the infamous iconoclast and blasphemer Erebus, the dark apostate of the World-Bearers, the Traitor Legion, had unleashed the foulest of forbidden sorceries upon the loyal subjects of the God Emperor of mankind. Upon the world of Ibrium, a shrine world of the Ecclesiarchy, the dark apostate had ordered the building of immense cathedrals dedicated to the dark powers of the warp. That these monstrosities existed upon such a formerly sacred world was a profanity beyond words, but according to Imperial intelligence reports, they were constructed at the expense of 1,000,000 souls promised to the Emperor. Upon the completion of these dark monuments, Erebus ordered the ritual execution of every last innocent who still drew breath on the planet at the completion of their labors. The Dark Apostate's sins did not end at genocide. The rites by which the people of Iberium were sacrificed drew forth the full fury of the Imperium, unleashing its anger upon the domains of mankind. Seething warp storms that threatened to cut the Cadian system off entirely from the outside racked Imperial space lanes, and the Eye of Terror probed with a malevolent purpose. The raw stuff of the warp had been unleashed, pouring through the rents in the thin skin of reality created by the World-Bearer's incantation, and calling up vast warp storms across the region. Many outlying worlds of the Segmentum, such as the Seychelles and Caliban, were now engulfed in raging tempests. Some simply cut off from aid, others reduced to shifting realms of madness, as the denizens of the Imperium ran riot across entire worlds. Abbadon was amongst the worst affected worlds, where the once proud ecclesiarchy cathedral had stood. Now blasphemous monuments to the powers of the warp claimed the domain of chaos. Across the Cadian sector, where kilometer-high hive cities had once pierced the clouds, now gargantuan carnal houses dominated worlds forever lost to mankind. Soon, astropathic communications from vessels caught in the flaring of the Eye of Terror, and at least 3 warp storms in the immediate region, led the Cadian High Command to conclude that Erebus intended to isolate the Imperial forces by making warp travel all but impossible. To a certain degree, Erebus has succeeded, though the Imperial forces were still able to remain in contact with the majority of their commands by way of astropathic relay. The warp storms continued to grow more and more intense with each passing solar day, and the Cadian sector High Command's command and control capability was stretched to the limit. Contact was lost with the entire worlds, armies and fleets, and unfortunately, the High Command was forced to rely upon increasingly compromised astropathic communications for each scrap of information that could be gathered about the overall situation. The Betrayer. Despite the interference from the warp, astropathic reports continued to trickle into the Cadian High Command. The most disturbing of these was transmission from a planetary defense force major upon the world of Tabor, whose brutal accounts of the events afflicting his garrison made for gruesome reading. If the report was to be believed, none other than Karn of the World Eater's Traitor Legion, the so-called Betrayer, had fallen upon that doomed world and shed the blood of its brave defenders in the name of his unspeakable patron, Khorne. The Blood God, despite the arrival of this fiend, Imperial forces had made gains upon Tabor and across the Agrippina sector. If the Imperial defenders could somehow contain Karn's mad rampage, the strategic situation in that region would be, at the very least, somewhat more acceptable. Pursuit of the Voice. During the campaigns of the 13th Black Crusade, the Dark Angels and Space Wolves' ancient mutual rivalry caused severe disruptions to Imperial defensive efforts in the Sentinel Worlds area. Though both forces operated in the same region for several solar weeks, they refused to coordinate their actions, harming the ability of the Imperial Guard commanders on the ground to act, for they could not rely upon the aid of either chapter. The situation soon changed as the Dark Angels, abruptly left the area in search of renegade individuals they refused to identify. The Dark Angels sought the shadowy heretic, calling himself the Voice of the Emperor, who was operating on the world of Leitar. The Dark Angels launched a number of strikes against this figure, but on each occasion found that the pressure of constant attacks upon their hallowed ground in the Caliban system forced them to redeploy their forces. Each time the Dark Angels managed to close on the suspected location of the Voice, he somehow proved able to slip through their clutches, leaving behind taunting, heretical graffiti. The Voice transmitted a number of all-channel voxcasts throughout the war, making obscure references to the First Legion's earliest history, as well as making astonishing claims against their Primarch Lionel Johnson. The Dark Angels and the Unforgiven successor chapters vehemently rebuted these blasphemous broadcasts. The Dark Angels and the chapters of the Unforgiven relentlessly pursued this heretic and his followers and eventually captured him. But as the Voice lay languishing within the holds of one of their vessels, he somehow, through some as yet unidentified means, managed to effect his escape. The Green Crusade. This is going to be about orcs, isn't it? With the forces of chaos overwhelming every Imperial world within the vicinity of the Eye of Terror, a large force of orcs took advantage of the state of anarchy threatening many star systems and launched an all-out attack upon the worlds of Scarus sector. The so-called Green Crusade was remarkably well coordinated for an orc invasion, and soon succeeded in grinding down the defenses of several imperial worlds, notably Lete 9 or 11. The Black Templars chapter diverted a number of fighting companies to oppose them, lest they gather into a fully fledged war. The Battle of Kasr-Holm. The forces of chaos continued to hit imperial forces hard across the entire region surrounding the Eye of Terror. The fortress world of Kasr-Holm, one of the outer planets of the Cadia system, had borne the brunt of the chaotic ground assault on Cadia over a number of solar days, with wave after wave of frenzied mutants assaulting the walls of the fortress world's capital city. 15 regiments of Cadian shock troops manned the defenses there, and an entire legion of the Adeptus Titanicus was deployed. Were it only the seemingly endless hordes of ill-disciplined mutants attacking Kasr-Holm's capital, the Imperial defenders might have been able to contain them there. But the assaults were led by none other than the traitor Astartes of the Black Legion. The Black Legion were content to allow the thousands of mutants to crash against the Kasr-Holm's capital's defenses in order to wear down and deplete their material stores through sheer attrition. Each wave had repulsed, but only at the cost of many brave defenders, and with little or no effect on the arch-enemy's forces' numbers. Just when the attackers were sent once more into an undisciplined rout, the Black Legionnaires launched their own attack. These attacks cost the Imperial defenders dear, though unfortunately they were unable to pierce the defenders' lines. Yet with each successive wave, they were only able to kill a handful of the enemy, while the casualties of the defenders sustained were intolerantly high. Lord Castellan Creed moved his headquarters from Cadia to Kasr-Holm to counter the crisis rapidly developing there, believing that his inspiring presence would make the same difference as the addition of several regiments. He led a bold counterattack at the head of the Cadian 8th Regiment, the Lord Castellan's own, against the forces of chaos, slaying forth with the Imperial force once the latest wave of mutants had receded, and struck at the Black Legion before the Chaos Space Marines' own assaults could develop. The Imperial counterattack was a resounding success, and as Creed returned to the walls of Kasr-Holm's capital at the head of the 8th Cadian, the entire length of the eastern wall erupted into the cheers of many thousands of men. But soon the Battle of Kasr-Holm took a new and an unanticipated turn, one that could scarcely be believed had it not been witnessed personally. At the height of the next assault of the mutants upon the eastern wall of Kasr-Holm's capital cities, primarily the fortress, at the moment when it appeared as if the Black Legion would force a breach, the feral 13th Company of Space Wolves appeared from behind the traitors' lines and inflicted a crushing defeat upon them. Both the Chaos attackers and the Imperial defenders heard with their own ears the animalistic howls emitted by these barbarous warriors, even though many were at their station some distance from the fighting. The sound chilled everyone who heard it to the core. Fortunately, the effect upon the enemy was greater still. The vile mutants fled first, turning their backs and fleeing in an instant. Their Black Legion masters attempted to forestall the rout, firing upon the mutants in an effort to render them more terrified of their own master's retribution than they were of the 13th Company. But their efforts were wasted, and many Black Legionnaires were trampled as the mutants stampeded from the walls. Soon the Black Legionnaires were themselves assaulted, and those not cut down from the rear were forced to quit the field, an event unheard of to date for the fierce Chaos Space Marines of Abbadon's own traitor legion. The 13th Company's attack was over almost as soon as it had begun, and they soon withdrew, making no attempts to communicate with the other Imperial forces as they did so. Imperium Resurgent. With so many sectors of the Segmentum Obscurus now cut off from Imperial reinforcements by the actions of the forces of chaos, the war had escalated by a degree of magnitude in those areas still accessible to both sides. The fighting in such regions as the Cadian Scarus and Agrippina sector had reached an unprecedented level, with millions throwing themselves upon the crucible of utter and total war to save the Cadian Gate from falling irrecoverably into the clutches of the ruinous powers. In an amazing twist of fate, the Imperial reinforcements from Battlefleet Solar arrived many solar weeks earlier than expected. For the tides of the warp have never been predictable. The Lost 13 Company of the Space Wolves added their feral might to the battle for the chaos-infested capital city of Holm, and the mighty vessel of Durk Lurstafon, at the head of the Imperial Navy's battle group Roark, braved the warp storm to bring aid to the besieged Cadian system. Under the bruised and crackling skies of his homeworld, Creed, the Lord Castellan of Cadia, had launched a major counterassault against the forces of chaos infesting the fortress world, while the White Scars chapter engaged the troops of the arch-enemy across the Cadian sector. Not a single man was spared, and the death toll spiraled ever upward. Space Marine Crusade. After many long solar weeks of beleaguered stubborn resistance, the defenders of the Cadian Gate were finally reinforced by the combined forces of dozens of Space Marine chapters. This Imperial Crusade had been gathered from the most distant regions of the galaxy, answering the call to arms issued when the forces of Abbadon had first commenced their invasion. The Space Marine Crusade was greeted with adulation and joy by the battered and bloody defenders of the Cadian Gate. The Space Marines who had fought at the gate since the beginning of the conflict were now joined by their brethren, and all stood ready to take the fight to the arch-enemy, with the courage and conviction that only Space Marines could display. The simmering rivalries between the Space Wolves and the Dark Angels, stationed in the Sentinel world, were eclipsed by the alleged fallen angel sighting near the ruins of Caliban, and the rumors of an artifact of the Primarch Leman Rus that was held on the world of the Nemesis Tessera. The Blood Angels, after their arrival at Castle of Partox on Cadia, prepare for the assault of the largest horde of World Eaters seen in living memory. Typhus, the Herald of Nurgle, took a personal hand in the battle for the world of Makaria, teleporting in and slaughtering platoon after platoon of Cadian guardsmen before returning to his flagship. His gift of fear inflicted the Cadians' ranks even quicker than the plagues he spread by his mere presence. Having re-established contact with the other chapter masters fighting in the region, Logan Grimnar, the commander of the Adeptus Astartes Command Council for the campaign, dictated that all Astartes' efforts should be focused on the defense of Cadian, Bellis Corona, and Agrippina sectors of the Segmentum. Now the contact had been made with those chapters newly arrived in the Segmentum. A coordinated attack could be launched that was set to sweep away the invaders in one fell swoop. Many within the Cadian High Command prayed that two of the greatest Astartes chapters to serve the Imperium, the Dark Angels and the Space Wolves, would set aside their internecine disagreement for long enough for their efforts to bear fruit. With so many Space Marines now bolstering the Imperial defense, the forces of the traitor legions had not been idle. The Chaos Rear Guard joined the fray, engaging the Space Marines in every theater of war. Those traitors who had turned up their master and their kin 10 millennia past were consumed with hatred for their erstwhile battle brothers, and threw themselves at the new arrivals with wanton bloodlust. With such legendary warriors as the Blood Angels, the Black Templars, the Imperial Fists, the Howling Griffins, and the White Scars, and the many more now defending Imperial space from Abbadon's invasion, the Imperium at long last possessed a real chance to successfully turn back the 13th Black Crusade. Agrippina. 4 companies of Blood Angels answered the call to defend the Cadian Gate, arriving toward the middle of the conflict. A significant force of Blood Angels immediately fell upon the Chaos Hordes, assaulting the world of Agrippina. And they sought out the leader of the attacking forces, the notorious Chaos Champion of Khorne, Kosalox the Forsworn, and his warband, and his World Eaters warband, the Forsworn. In an epic confrontation linked to the mythic conflict between the Blood Angels Primarch Sanguinius and the mighty bloodthirster Kabandaha, at the closing of the Ultimate Gate during the height of the Horus Heresy at the Battle of Terra, the Blood Angels took the fight directly to the enemy. Kosalax, fully aware that his bodyguard was no match for the frenzied sons of Sanguinius, called upon the slavering demons of Khorne for aid. The summoning rite was an act of wanton, traitorous carnage, as the warlord ordered his world eaters to sacrifice the lives of their chaos cultist allies in order to gain the favor of the blood god. Uncounted thousands were slaughtered in mere solar hours, their blood flowing in rivers through the corridors of Agrippina's primary hive city, and cascading from ventilation grills as waterfalls of gore. The sacrifice had the desired result, as the first of the Blood Angels' veteran assault squads screamed into battle, a blasphemous avatar of the blood god, another bloodthirster, who ripped his way through the skin of reality to confront the sons of Sanguinius. The first Blood Angels to meet the greater demon were torn limb from limb, the beast devouring their surrendered bodies as a taunt to their battle brothers. The remaining space marines were sent into paroxysms of rage at such desecration, and threw themselves at the demon with no thought for their own safety. At the height of the battle, the sanguinary high priest Numitor confronted the demon and dealt it a blow that stunned it for a brief moment. Seizing the advantage, the brothers of the Death Company leapt upon his back, but the demon recovered and severed the high priest's arm with a crack of his long whip. Not lip, that would have been weird. The priest was holding one of the sacred chapter relics known as the Blood Chalice, which bore an infinitesimal amount of the blood of the chapter's Primarch, and the blessed liquid was spilled across the tarnished paving. At that moment, a deadly still overcame the scene, as the Blood Angels were momentarily shocked beyond action at the sight of their Primarch's sacred blood seeping into the ground. Then, the silence was broken, as Numitor staggered to his feet and bellowed the words of the rite of exsanguination. The assembled brethren of the Death Company were overcome with visions of their last time their Primarch's blood had been split by a servant of chaos, when Sanguinius had fallen at the hands of the arch-traitor Horus. The Demon Company went berserk. They hacked down the bloodthirster in a savage, rage-fueled frenzy, oblivious to the fact that it dragged half their number down with it, before turning their hatred upon the warband of Kosalax, the Forsworn. The World Eaters were expelled from Agrippina at great cost to the Blood Angels, though the annals of the chapter's history will celebrate the casting out of the greater demon. The Chaos Champion Kosalax was not found at the Hive City, and the sanguinary High Priest Numitor vowed to hunt him down, no matter the cost. Diamor Campaign. The Blood Angels often hurled themselves into the Imperium's greatest and most terrible wars, fighting with a dynamism and determination that leaves even their brother Space Marines in awe. Of late, they have found themselves stretched thinner than ever, fighting simultaneously in the Third War for Armageddon, in actions around the Eye of Terror, and against the onrushing horror of High Fleet Leviathan. It was on the shield worlds of Cryptus that Commander Dante and many of his finest battle brothers faced the horrors of the Cryptoid Tendril. The splinter feet of High Fleet Leviathan was headed straight for the Blood Angels' home, a world of Baal, and its advance had to be stopped. The Blood Angels prevailed against the Xenos foes, yet Baal was still at strike. Dante's force made all speed through the warp to return and bolster the defenses of the Blood Angels' chapter planet, but they were still many solar weeks distant when the word reached them from High Chaplain Astorath the Grim. A new threat had emerged in the Diamor system, an invasion by the armies of chaos that could undermine the defenses of the Cadian Gate if it were allowed to succeed. Already the High Chaplain was en route at the head of the Blood Angels' 5th Company, but greater strength would be required to defeat the traitorous foe. With a heavy heart, Commander Dante diverted much of his own force, knowing that every warrior spent away was another who could not defend Baal. Yet they were the Blood Angels. They could do no less. Dante pressed on towards Baal with a little more than an honor guard at his side, while the rest of his warriors turned their voidcraft and made for the Diamor system. The tides of the warp proved fickle. The warship of the Blood Angels' 1st and 2nd Companies made up considerable time on Astorath and his 5th Company warriors, and translated into the Diamor system within only solar minutes of their brothers. It was almost as though some other agency wished to see them burst simultaneously into real space. The momentary delay proved crucial, for it was all that stood between 1st Captain Carolan's forces and sudden damnation. As the 1st Captain established contact with the 5th Company's vessel, Death Company Chaplain Deanor informed him of their plight. As the Blood Angels' vessel translated in system, they were suddenly enveloped by a severe psychic attack. It was a warp sorcery of some kind that engulfed the Blood Angels' void ships like a storm. But worse were its effects upon the minds of all on board. The storm inflicted visions of the sort every Blood Angel had hoped to never see. The malefic sorcery struck at the chapter's genetic curse. It unleashed the Black Rage. Though exact numbers remained uncertain, it appeared that almost the entirety of the 5th Company had been affected. There was a moment's pause at Carolan's digesting this terrible news. The Black Rage. All Blood Angels dreaded its touch, but to have it forced upon them by some artifice of the foe, it was a violation of the highest order. Lord Astorath and then Company Chaplain Daanor, the other chaplains on board and their librarians, all those with psychic training or psychic defenses had survived. The rest had fallen to the curse. The mortal helots who made up the warship's crew had cloistered themselves in terror, with some having been slain by the affected battle brothers. It was sheer bedlam aboard the vessels of the 5th Company. 1st Captain Carolan immediately dispatched the chaplains of both the 1st and 2nd Companies, as well as the Sanguinary Guard, to aid the ill-guarded survivors and bring their fallen under control in an attempt to restore their ships to order. Vengeance and death. After they brought their fallen brethren under control and determined the wider strategic situation in the system, the Blood Angels wasted no time in launching their attack. They could not do so quickly enough, for already it seemed as though the enemy's plans were well advanced. Crimson Slaughter warbands were present at all the primary Adeptus Mechanicus hubs. Enemy forces were heavily investing the north and south hemispheres of the world of Amatel as expected, concentrated around the multiple dig sites. At Hub Beta Secundus, the Death Company dropped in 2 waves. Chaplain Deanor and his brothers came down well within the Mechanicus complex, landing between the advanced elements of the Crimson Slaughter and their prize. The Crimson Slaughter has struck at 5 major concentrations of Mechanicum forces on the planet. The 5 zones were given separate war zone designation by the Crimson Slaughter: carnage, cruelty, hatred, malice, and perdition. Chaos Lord Kron, the Relentless, himself led the Chaos advance in Warzone Carnage. Meanwhile, Astorath and Lemartes lead the main force of the Death Company against the outer edge of the dig site's defenses, seeking to encircle in a construction ring of carnage. The Crimson Slaughter soon found themselves trapped against the defense lines they had so recently overrun. The devastation wrought by the Death Company was breathtaking. The Crimson Slaughter were pushed back on every front, forced to huddle amongst the wreckage defenses of Beta Secundus outskirts. Many of the traders were becoming slow and clumsy, burdened by uncontrollable mutation and shuddering with warp energies that were causing them to literally burst into flames. The Crimson Slaughter attack had lost all momentum. It was fragmenting by the Solar Second, caught from both sides by Death Company and Mechanicus forces. Daanor proudly noted that his Death Company warriors had fought with magnificent strength and courage, despite their terrible affliction. Though the enemy had thrown everything at them, from brass-sinewed demon engines to disgusting warpcraft, still Danor's warriors had prevailed. The Blood Angels continued to press their attack, intent on killing every last trader present on Amatel. The defense of Amatel. Leading elements consisting of the 1st, 2nd, and the afflicted 5th companies, Astrorath, the Grim, and Lemartes, put the traitor forces to flight. The arrival of the Blood Angels had changed the tides of war upon Amatel, and made possible a concentrated counteroffensive on every front. Moreover, the attack by the Death Company upon Hub Beta Secundus had seen Cranor the Relentless and his elite guard hurled back in disarray. For a time, it looked as though the war was turning resoundingly in the Imperium's favor. When the Chaos response came, however, it proved unexpectedly devastating. The true architect behind the traitor's attack, the Chaos Lord Sorofax of the Black Legion, had planned for this inevitable outcome. As he continued to enacting a dark ritual, a large World Eater's murder fleet arrived in System, led by the infamous berserker Karn the Betrayer. This conglomeration of World Eater warbands was a chronate force of prodigious size, known as the Butcher Horde, led by the indomitable might of the Betrayer himself. Karn's forces, led by the Berserk Lords Korbadash and Vraka, launched an immediate Dreadclaw drop pod assault on Amatel. Soon, Karn himself appeared at the vanguard of the murderous horde, slaying Imperial forces with unimaginable brutality. But the Butcher Horde faced fierce resistance, as the might of the Death Company met with the World Eaters head-on. The favorite of Khorne dueled Death Company Chaplain Danor, but was led into an ambush by an Imperial River-class Titan of the Legio Metallica. This attack marked the beginning of a counteroffensive by the Loyalist Titan Legion, which decimated the traitor's forces. But this merely forestalled the traitor's advance, as their sheer numbers soon began to overwhelm the Blood Angels' forces. Yet the excerpt leadership of Astrorath and Death Company Chaplain Danor restored some order to the afflicted brothers' ranks. Spearheaded by the furious Chaplain Lemartes, the Death Company then countercharged their enemies, dictating the shape of the battle rather than waiting to be overwhelmed. It was a daring move, and one that slowed the coordinated advance. Yet soon enough, the massively outnumbered Blood Angels sustained appalling casualties. Over 19% of the Death Company were slain by the time multiple God Engines of the Legio Metallica were able to reach the engagement area. The thunderous advance of the Titans drove the coordinate forces back and fractured their cohesion, providing time for Astrorath and Lemartes to extract the last remnants of their forces. Chaplain Danor was born from the battlefield by Astrorath himself, hacked and mangled by Karn the Betrayer. The loss of the Death Company brothers was acceptable, for it had always been their destiny to perish in selfless battle, and they had sold themselves as dearly as they could. Astrorath would not allow Draenor to perish, however, for a Death Company chaplain was amongst the most accomplished of his order. Hex Infernium. In the wake of the Titans' attack, the surviving Coronate warbands scattered away from Hub Beta Secundus, marauding at will across the rest of the world in search of blood and skulls. The surviving Legio Metallica God Engines also disengaged. The Titan's strength needed elsewhere to defend against the fresh waves of Demon Engines being flown in from Ilion, Nor was this danger restricted to Hub Beta Secundus. As the war raged across the surface of Amatel, Imperial counterattacks were being driven back or ground down by huge packs of newly forged Demon Engines. The traitors were receiving a steady stream of powerful reinforcements. The Imperial forces were not. By the inescapable arithmetic of war, it could only be a matter of time before the forces of chaos were victorious. Just as the Blood Angels' attack on the Demon Engines factory on Iolin seemed doomed to costly failure, there came the manifestation of a mysterious power that has long aided Sanguinius' sons in the darkest hours. Blazing with golden light, the Sanguinor dropped from the storm-lashed heavens and rallied the Blood Angels. With the help of their avenging angel, the Blood Angels successfully destroyed the Hex Infernium, denying the traitors any further reinforcements of Demon Engines. As the Crimson Slaughter continued to bleed against the might of the valiant Blood Angels, the Chaos Lord Sorophas rejoiced as his machinations finally came to fruition. The sorcerer planned to use the slaughter and carnage on Amatel to help power the chaotic artifact known as the Banshee Stone, to create a vast warp rift that would drown the Diamor system in a veritable tidal wave of demons. The resulting destruction wreaked by the Neverborn would extend Abbadon the Despoiler's crimson path from Cadia to Diamor, and hopefully, one day, Terra itself. The Screaming Pit. In the wake of the Archangel's destruction of Ioline, the war for the Diamor system entered its final. Within solar hours of the Hex Infernum's destruction, word reached the Imperial leadership of combat escalating across the star system. Meanwhile, Chaos ground forces moved to strike the killing blow. The time had come for victory or death. Stirred to action by the destruction of Ioline, the Black Legion struck at Amatel directly. They concentrated their full force upon Hub Beta Secundus and the dark prize that lurked there. The Imperial forces had gathered to form a great noose, marshalling their strength before they struck the last blow to eradicate the Chaos threat once and for all. The plan belonged to Captain Aphael, whose own forces formed the southernmost element of the offensive. As one of the armies of the Imperium advanced across the burned-out kill zone that the Mechanicus had cleared so many solar weeks before, they charged into the blizzard of fire hurled from on high by the warships of the Black Legion. Barrage bombs sailed down to explode with enormous force, sending knights sprawling and turning squads of Skitarii to ash. Lance beams hammered Titan void shields or automized squads of assault marines. Yet though the bombardment was heavy and the destruction horrific, the Imperial forces did not slacken their pace. While battle raged on the planet below, vast warships dueled in the void high above. The adepts of the Adeptus Mechanicus understood the true prize that the Black Legion sought upon Amatel. Even if few others did. It was the thing that had brought techno-archaeologist Dominus Isvan Fon and his followers from the forward world of Metallica to this cursed planet. It was a power of unimaginable magnitude, though the Imperium and the traitors sought it for different reasons. Lord Sorphas knew its true nature, for it was he and his cabal who had located for Abbadon. The despoiler had set his forces in motion as soon as it had been identified. The battle to come would bear upon the success of the 13th Black Crusade, for it offered an opportunity to extend Abbadon's crimson path like a bloody wound across Imperial space. The secret that the Black Legion sought, and that the Adeptus Mechanicus were racing against them to seize, lay deep beneath the surface of Amatel. It was ancient, unspeakably, unimaginably so. Known as the Banshee Stone, it was a prison the size of a world, forged by godlike beings before Terra had even spawned its first single-celled organisms. It was a cage for infernal creatures of the warp, a demonic weapon to dwarf the damnation catch that had slipped through Abbadon's fingers on the world of Pandorax. And according to the divinations of the Chaos Lord Sorophas and his followers, it was full to the brim with howling demons. It required only the correct ritual to be broken open, at which point the sudden release of so many warp entities would tear a gaping wound in reality itself. When battle raged between the Blood Angels and the Black Legion, Sorophas, a potent Black Legion Chaos Sorcerer, arrived at the lip of the Warzone Carnage's main excavation site at Hub Beta Secundus. Their objective was the gate of the primordial demon cage. Thanks to Crimson Slaughter, Lord Sorophas knew where the cage's wards were weakest and where its inmates' powers could leak through. Though the Blood Angels fought the force of chaos to a standstill and looked as if they would achieve inevitable victory, the heroes of the Blood Angels felt a terrible sense that they had been maneuvered into attacking too late. With their foes gone, the red-armored warriors rushed down the earth ramp and into the flickering depths of the excavation site. There they faced the screaming horror of the chaos artifact known as the Banshee Stone, a twisted crystal the size of a boarding torpedo around which blood was welling through the cracking bedrock in lapping tides. Though the ritual was not yet complete, Lord Sorophas realized that he was out of time. This would not be another Pandarax, however. The Banshee Stone had reached a terrible pitch of disharmony, and massive damage had been wrought upon the arcane wards that held the demon cage closed. It might not rupture immediately, but it would not last long. With a booming psychic command, the sorcerer ordered the retreat, abandoning the Banshee Stone to run on for as long as he could. Sorophas and his cabal stormed up the ramp that led out of the pit. Accompanied by black-armored Terminators, the sorcerer and his acolytes unleashed the full fury of their psychic might to drive back the Blood Angels who rushed to meet them. With breathing space secured and a clear teleport lock established, the Black Legion was whisked away in a blaze of warp light, leaving its foes raging in its wake. On the planet's surface, the slaughter continued for many solar hours, before the last of the traitor's forces were destroyed. Only by the combined efforts of the librarian Asamael and his physically attuned brothers was the Banshee Stone's hideous laments silenced. By that time, the traitor fleet had scattered, making for predetermined retreat coordinates. The Blood Angels then extracted their force from Amatel's surface. In the solar hours that followed, the roaring blast waves swept across the planet's surface, obliterating all trace of chaotic industry on the planet, and leaving nothing but blackened, glowing ash in its wake. It took 7 solar days before the fury of the global firestorms burned down to fume and smoke, by which time the planet was little more than a ravaged shell. Destruction was unmanageable. But the Blood Angels had their victory and had dealt Sorophos' forces a dire blow. Of the Sanguinary there was no sign. Garlin himself had seen him escape the destruction of Ioline, a streak of gold soaring away into the heavens. When the hour was once again dark enough, he would return to aid his brothers. The Imperium believed they had won a great victory on Amatal, that they had foiled the despoiler's plans once again. But Librarian Asamael realized that the enemy had done more damage to the Banshee Stone than the Blood Angels had first realized. Perhaps the defeat on Amatal had not been avoided, but merely delayed. Unknown to the Imperial forces, already, the cracks in the crystal that served as a demonic cage had spread beyond repair, even had anyone living known how to fix it. The energies of the Banshee Stone were no longer needed. It was just a matter of time before the sorcerer Sorophas and his followers completed their diabolical task. The bars of the demon cage would break. It was only a matter of time. And only a matter of time. Would break. Was only a matter of time. I don't know what the wiki says. As they gathered their forces, departed the system, and returned to Baal, the Blood Angels left behind Librarian Asamael and a squad of 10th Company scouts. These Blood Angels will remain on Asamael, attempting to gauge the true extent of the damage done, and standing watch when, the prison of the Banshee Stone threatened to break asunder. Amistial Majoris. 7 of the 8 companies dispatched by the Howling Griffins became engaged in a grueling trench war on Amistial Majoris. Having broken through the Death Guard plague fleet, blockading the world, the 2nd to 8th companies arrived in time to bolster the regiments of the Astra Militaris Drukian Fenguard, who were suffering horrific losses to the hell-spawned epidemics unleashed by the traitor forces arrayed against them. Within solar days, the Howling Griffins and the Legio Astorum's Titans were the only forces able to man the extensive defenses constructed by the Drukians. Any warrior caught in the open and not protected by power armor when the plague winds hit was ensured an excruciating death and an eternity of servitude as a plague zombie in Nurgle's legions of undead. The first company of the Howling Griffins, including the chapter master Abbadon, was at the time based on the chapter battle barge Force of Destiny, and was engaged in the persecution of a particularly vicious company of Night Lords Chaos Space Marines, known as the Chosen, commanded by the infamous demon prince Periclitor. It was widely known that the Howling Griffins harbored a particularly deep hatred of this demon prince. While that hatred served the greater needs of the Imperium's defenses against the forces of chaos, no other authority sought to question Avalor's actions. The Iron Knights chapter had been engaged upon a self-imposed penitent crusade for a number of solar decades when Abbadon's 13th Black Crusade smashed into the defenders of the Cadian Gate, and they were amongst the first of the chapters in the region to respond. The chapter's elite first companies soon became mired in the defense of Amistiel Majoris, bolstering the flagging defense of the Howling Griffins chapter as they fought a grueling trench war against the unremitting assaults of the Plague Marines on the Death Guard Traitor Legion. The war zone soon became a plague-ridden quagmire. The decomposing bodies of the plague god's victims forming putrid, sucking swamps through which the defenders were forced to wade in order to bring battle to their forces. A sickly patina of filth soon mirrored the Iron Knight's gleaming blue-gray armor, and the company's chaplains were forced to perform daily rites of purification in order to keep the virulent plague at bay. Recent sermons by these chaplains have linked the chapter's continuing presence in the war zone with their eventual redemption in the eyes of the Emperor, vowing that the world would only fall at the cost of the entire chapter. By the third solar week of the Black Crusade, Amistiel Majoris was considered sufficiently secure that a portion of its Space Marine defenders could be spared to reinforce the Cadian system, which in the days following the destruction of St. Josmain's Hope, I don't know how I used to pronounce this, was in desperate need of aid. Bellis Corona. Upon arriving at the Cadian Gate, the Doom Eagles chapter dispatched forces to a number of war zones, notably areas that had already suffered terribly at the hands of the forces of chaos. The largest of these detachments, under the command of Captain Luctus of the 3rd Company, was involved in the operations within the Bellis Corona subsector of the Bellis Corona sector, where the notoriously pious chapter battled those who had fallen to the curse of unbelief. Only those without the strength of faith to resist were afflicted by the zombie plague, and it had been noted that not a single Doom Eagle's battle brother was affected by its blight. The Doom Eagles proved effective in combating the plague zombies, infesting many worlds of the subsector, though, typically for this aloof chapter, they had refused all offers of support in consolidating these successes. Adeptus Astartes reinforcements. A number of other Space Marine chapters contributed to the overall defense of the Cadian Gate during the 13th Black Crusade. These chapters include Harbingers. Although they had most recently been purging orks from the Piscinian belt, the Harbingers chapter had an old score to settle with the Death Guard. The chapter's enmity towards these traitors could be traced back to a raid on their homeworld of Birmingham. I'm not joking, it's Birmingham. The Black Planet by the Death Guard, aided by the infamous renegade known as Fabius Bile. Their chapter master, Nimrod Grudge, received early word of the outbreak of the Plague of Unbelief and mobilized the chapter accordingly, leaving most of the chapter either in the Piscinia system or on the Black Planet. The Harbingers 1st, 4th, 5th, 7th, and 9th companies boarded their battle barge unrelenting fury and set course for the world of Nemesis Tessera. Immediately upon their arrival, they were recruited for a special mission. As the Harbingers were known for their skills in the art of boarding space hulks and launching planetary assaults, it could only be assumed that their mission involved the use of that particular skill set. Marines Exemplar. Led by their chapter master, Commander Maxime Absalon, the Marines Exemplar committed all but a single reserve company to the defense of the Cadian Gate early in the conflict, arriving less than a solar week after the Space Wolves chapter. Accepting Logan Grimnar as the more experienced commander, Absalom allowed his companies to be deployed according to the Great Wolf's strategy, which saw them dispatched across all war zones of the Segmentum to bolster those imperial defenses most in danger of falling. Tragically, Absalom was lost in the opening phase of the conflict, as his company attempted to extract the senior staff of an astropathic way station before the forces of Abbadon overwhelmed the jungle moon on which it was located. The 5th Columnus Regiment, a terror guard unit led by the demagogue Colonel Job, was making a push towards the Bellis Corona system, but had first to secure the jungle moon. Greatly outnumbered, Absalom led his forces in a desperate breakout, and although the majority of his company escaped, the commander's Thunderhawk gunship was shot down, exposing as it failed to clear the jungle canopy. Absalom was listed as missing in action, though the Marine's exemplar did not give up hope that he might have survived the crash and was still active behind enemy lines. However, Absalom's second-in-command and successor, Captain Raoul, distanced the chapter from Logan Grimnar's Adeptus Astartes command council, preferring instead to deploy the companies of his chapter as his own advisor saw fit. Sons of Dorn. The Sons of Dorn chapter deployed the bulk of their chapter in the defense of the Imperium from the predations of Abbadon the Despoiler's 13th Black Crusade. They valiantly defended the same worlds along the Eye of Terror that their chapter's legendary hero, Alexandros the Great, had liberated millennia earlier. More than half of the chapter was involved. Subjugators. The Subjugators chapter dispatched 3 companies directly to Cadia within solar days of receiving word that the despoiler had returned, vowing that the remainder of the chapter's resource would be mustered as soon as was possible. The chapter arrived aboard 2 mighty battle barges, just as the Chaos Warfleet was commencing its initial invasion of the Cadia system. The Subjugators threw themselves straight into the conflict, during which the 3rd Company distinguished itself by triggering the reactor overload that destroyed one of the Ramillis-class starforts orbiting Cadia. At the very moment, the forces of Chaos gained control of it. Only a handful of the 3rd Company escaped the subsequent explosion, but their heroic sacrifice undoubtedly saved the lives of many thousands of Imperial defenders on the surface of Cadia, who would otherwise have found themselves facing the might of the Starfort's guns. Yet the Subjugators were reduced to a state of disarray after losing the majority of the 3rd Company in this manner. The 1st and 5th Companies took heavy casualties during the siege of Cadia itself, notably in defense of the Kasar Galan, and the subsequent rearguard actions during the desperate Tarn retreat, and were in serious need of resupply. The Subjugators were a recently founded chapter, and as such maintained only a small reserves of gene seed. The loss of 168 battle brothers who fell on Cadia was a terrible blow to the chapters, particularly as the Subjugators' apothecaries were in most cases unable to recover the gene seed of the fallen. The chapter was eventually faced with the choice of whether to retire from the conflict and regroup, allowing time to rebuild their numbers, or to fight on regardless and risk the death of their chapter through sheer attrition, before it had even had a real chance to make its mark in the annals of the Imperium. White Scars. The first contingent of White Scars to reach the Cadian Gate was the Brotherhood of Kajong Khan, a leader known for his victories during the Third War of Armageddon, and a dozen other campaigns. Kajok led his forces against the Chaos hordes massing on Cadia, launching a series of devastating hit-and-run attacks across that world's bleak moors. Within a short period of time, Kalajok's Brotherhood had become a major threat to Abbadon's plans, striking deep within enemy-held territory. So effective they were, their actions, that the sieges of Kasruz, can I buy a vow? Mirak, Soliq, and Rantik were lifted as Chaos forces were diverted to hunt down and confront the elusive White Scars. It would seem that Kajok's attackers were in fact too effective. Kajok's attacks were too effective. Wait, what? Yeah. For Abbadon himself ordered to the Brotherhood hunted down and destroyed once and for all. He knew that the Voicecars planned on diverting his forces piecemeal to oppose them. But he reasoned that a full-scale response would be beyond the scope of the small loyalist force to face. Ordering the first company of the Black Legion, as well as uncounted hordes of mutants, traitors, and chaos cultists out onto the moors, the despoiler began his hunt. It was through the divination of Abbadon's most senior advisor, the chaos sorcerer Zarafiston, that Cadia was finally located. Unaware that his forces was being watched through Zarafiston's scrying, Cadia launched a raid against an enemy slave train west of Lake Terror, only to discover that the convoy contained not imperial prisoners, but the chosen of Abbadon. The first wave of Voicecar bikers hit the convoy, only to find themselves hurling headlong into the guns of the Black Legion. These 4 bike squads, realizing they stood little chance against such a foe, continued their charge nonetheless, determined to buy time for the other warriors of the Brotherhood to regroup. The warriors of the first wave sold their lives dearly, and Cadia reluctantly ordered his men to withdraw, vowing that he would return at a time of his own choosing to avenge the deaths of his battle brothers. But Cadia did not choose the manner of his next confrontation with the enemy, for as his Brotherhood speed across the moors, they found every route cut off by the forces of chaos. At length, Cadia decided that to flee in the face of the enemy was an insult to the honor of his chapter, and resolved to make a last stand at the base of a pylon on the shores of the Cacudeus Sea. With the pylon to their back and the massed hordes of chaos, therefore, the warriors of Cadia's Brotherhood chose to defend themselves, according to the ancient tradition of their homeworld of Corgis, by launching a suicidal charge against the enemy. The 60 Voicecars smashed into a horde at least 50 times their own number, Cadia Khan at their head bellowing the battle cry of his chapter. As the Brotherhood smashed through the ranks of the horde, its warriors were torn from their saddle, one by one, falling to the sheer weight of numbers arrayed against them. Cadia rolled his own attack bike through a sea of mutated bodies, clawed arms, and whiplash tentacles seeking to drag him under with every meter he gained. Cadia Khan was the last of his Brotherhood to fall that day, and the Stormseers of the Voicecars claim that his shade remains upon the shadow ruin of Cadia, unwilling and unable to return to the chapter's homeworld of Corgis, until revenge is visited upon the heads of those who slew him. Lortok's evacuations. When Abbadon's fleet was seen approaching the agri-world of Lortox, the Ultramarines Honor Company distinguished itself with a bold spaceborne counter-assault against Abbadon's fleet as the Planet Killer closed with that imperial world on the outskirts of the Agrippina sector. The action bought Lortox's planetary defense forces time to evacuate a significant portion of the population, before the world was destroyed by the despoiler's horrific weapon of planetary destruction. Okay. The Ultramarines Honor Company managed to succeed in crippling the Planet Killer, but the massive warship still had enough power to limp away. In the aftermath of the Lortrax evacuation, the Honor Company redeployed to Cadia and the surrounding star system, launching a series of operations to hinder Abbadon's forces as they assaulted the Imperial positions. These attacks included a series of highly successful boarding action against the lumbering space hulks, being used to transport vast hordes of enemy troops to reinforce Abbadon's siege of Cadia. Thracian Primaris. Upon their arrival in the Segmentum Obscurus, the Black Templars chapter's first action was the relief of Thracian Primaris, which had sustained heavy assaults by the forces of chaos. For some solar weeks, the bulk of the force consisted of brethren previously embarked upon the hunt for Khazgul Mag Uruk Traka, the infamous orc warlord who had unleashed such devastation upon the imperial highworld of Armageddon, and their participants in the action on Thracia Prime left the pursuing Black Templars' crusades severely under strength. The Black Templars scattered the poorly led and deployed Chaos Warfleet in short order, breaking through the blockade to make an uncontested landfall at the Departamento Munitorium Logistical Support Center at Hive Demeter. The Brethren were welcomed as liberators by the beleaguered populace, but chose not to remain on the Hive world for long, moving on to drive the force of Chaos across the Scarus sector back towards the Eye of Terror. Next, we have Battle of Medusa. When the forces of Abbadon the Despoiler spilled forth from the Cadian Gate in the 99th year of the 41st millennium to launch his 13th Black Crusade, the Iron Hands Space Marine chapter knew that the homeworld of Medusa faced imminent invasion due to their close proximity to the Eye of Terror, and so the chapter scrambled to prepare the defenses. Given that Medusa was the only world from which the Iron Hands recruited new brethren, they were forced to defend it above all other considerations. While it is known that 2 of the chapter's clan companies were deployed elsewhere in the defense of the region, the greater strength of the chapter was used in the defense of their homeworld. The largest battle in the defense of Medusa came when all 10 of the gargantuan-tracked fortresses of the Iron Hands clan companies faced the invading traitor guardsmen of the Hardani 13th Heavy Armored Regiment. The geologically unstable plains of Medusa played host to one of the largest armored clashes the galaxy has seen since the infamous Battle of Talran during the Horus Heresy, when over 10,000 traitor tanks stormed towards the waiting Iron Hands fortresses. The ensuing battle raged for 5 solar days and 5 solar nights, as the traitors closed within firing range of the Iron Hands mobile fortresses. When the Iron Hands opened fire, it is said that over 100 tanks were destroyed in the first volley, for each clan company commanded firepower equal to a Centurio Ordinatus of the Adeptus Mechanicus. On the 5th solar day, at the height of the battle, the traitors broke through the Iron Hands lines, and an armored company of traitors outflanked one of the chapter's mobile fortresses and fired shell after shell into it at nearly point-blank range. The Iron Hands responded by launching a furious counterattack, spearheaded by assault squads armed with melta-bombs, who leapt from the crenellated towers of the mobile fortress to land atop the enemy tanks. Though many Astartes lost their lives in the attack, shot down by pinto-mounted weapons, or ground beneath the enemy's vehicle's armored tracks, their counterattack was successful in disabling or destroying the majority of the traitor armor and sending the rest into disorderly retreat. It was then that the Iron Hands launched an armored assault of their own, as whole formations of Predator Annihilator tanks disgorged from the mobile fortresses to run down and destroy the heretic tanks with ravening beams of las cannon fire. The Iron Hands managed to secure Medusa by the midpoint of the larger 13th Black Crusade campaign, and were able to deploy several clan companies to the defense of the Cadia system. Though they arrived too late to save Cadia from its fate, an Iron Warrior naval task force was dispatched to reinforce the naval world of Vigilantum. Battle of Castle Tyrok. The Dark Angels and the Space Wolves appeared to set aside their ancient vendetta long enough for Supreme Grandmaster Azrael and the Great Wolf Logan Grimnar to come to a mutual but temporary understanding. The 2 chapters took to the field together, intent upon proving the arch-enemy that the combined forces of the Space Wolves and the Dark Angels chapters were far greater than the sum of their parts. The whole circumstances and details of this arrangement have been kept from all who are not members of either chapter. Both chapters took to the fields together in defense of Castle Tyrok upon the world of Cadia against a substantial force of Chaos Mutants. The combined force of Dark Angels and Space Wolves smashed into the rear of the mutant mob, cutting them down without mercy, and each chapter's Astartes vowed to outdo the other in their skill at arms. As the last few mutants were dispatched, the chapter's friendly banter soon turned less camaraderie, and insults filled the air. Victory had been achieved, but the Sons of the Lion and the Sons of Russ soon parted ways, their long-time rivalry rearing its ugly head once again. Battle of Kasr Vasan. The lauded Imperial Fist chapter arrived at the Cadian Gate as part of the massive Adeptus Astartes reinforcement of the region. 5 companies smashing into the forces of the arch enemy, besieging Cadia as soon as contact was made. After an initial space engagement that saw the chapter's battle barges and strike cruisers take a fearsome toll on the Chaos Warfleet in the Cadian system, 3 of the companies carried out a combat drop on Cadia itself, while the other 2 dispersed to bolster the defenses in the surrounding sectors, including reinforcing the Iron Hands chapter at their homeworld of Medusa. The 1st, 2nd, and elements of the 3rd companies were instrumental in the defense of key points on Cadia, manning the walls of a number of fortresses with a steadfast resolution for which they were famed throughout the Imperium. In these actions, the 2nd Company was noted for exceptional acts of gallantry, overcoming a horde of mutants from the notorious Stigmatus Covenant, numbering almost 10,000 heretical fanatics. At the height of the Chaos Assault on the walls of Kasr Vasan, the company commander, Captain Tialo, gave his life holding a breach in the fortifications, repelling a mob of mutants numbering several hundred before succumbing to the terrible wounds inflicted upon him. The captain's body refused to die, however, and was led in stasis by the chapter's tech marines, who hoped to inter it within the mighty form of a dreadnought, so that the renowned warrior might continue to battle the forces of darkness beyond the death of his mortal body. Battle of Kasar Gihir. Oh really, let's buy another vow here. Let me make one thing clear, gentlemen. We are now in the fight of our lives. The arch enemy has come to our home, with greater force and fury than ever before. All that stands between him and victory is us. Us, gentlemen. It is we who must stand before the enemy and turn him back. Why? Because we're here, and there's no one else to do it for us. So if any man here believes he cannot do his duty to the Emperor, then he should present himself before the regimental commissars and stop wasting my time. Lord Castellan Creed, addressing the Cadian commands during the defense of Cadia. The skies above the war zone burned with the falling of orbital ordnance, and the chants of billion lunatics resounded. The tread of mighty battle titans shook the earth, and Imperial Navy fighter craft screamed overhead. The last days of the conflict had come upon the Imperium of Man. The Imperial forces could only pray that no servant of the Emperor faltered in his duties to the master of mankind, for to do so was to surrender humanity itself on the eternal pyre of damnation and ruin. The final stage of the 30th Black Crusade was fought across the Cadian, Agrippina, Bellis Corona, Scarus, Cinciare sectors of the Segmentum Obscurus. On Cadia, the strongholds of the Emperor fell one by one. The Vilcas and Cadus lines of battle buckled beneath the relentless hammering of uncounted enemy troops. Imperial forces on Cadia had been engaged upon a mobile defense, with Lord Castellan Creed marshalling the Astra Militarum regiments under his command to meet each enemy and cut it off before an unstable assault developed. But such were the numbers of the arch enemy's forces that his strategy quickly proved to be increasingly untenable, forcing the Cadian defenders onto the defensive. As they began to fall back to Castel Partox, an entire traitor Titan legion marched in line across the horizon. Framed against the blazing sky was as millions in this case, not billions, as millions of tons of ordnance fell from orbit. Hordes of mutants swarmed under the Titan's feet, sacrificing themselves to the twisted god machines. Living artillery stalked the battlefield, spewing shells the size of tanks. The chanting of a million madmen could be heard from the ramparts of Kasr Geher. But the Cadian 8th Regiment stood arrayed in companies across Kasr Geher's parade ground. Proud, courageous, and resolute, honor writ large upon the faces of each and every trooper. The Lord Castellan knew he was consigning many within his beloved regiment to their inevitable deaths. Furthermore, the troops knew it, and were proud to know it. They cared not, for they would upheld the pride of the Lord Castellan's own, Cadia and their sacred duty to the Emperor. That evening, the enemy launched their assault upon the citadel. It was presaged by a terrible, chilling wailing that bit deep into each man's sanity, but none wavered. Then a thunderous artillery barrage rained death and destruction upon the walls. But still the 8th Cadian refused to falter. Then came the first waves, and the men and women of the 8th Cadian opened fire upon them. A blazing wall of last fire sprang across the rapidly closing gap before the walls, and the enemy fell by the thousands. Many exhausted their last gun's charges in what seemed mere moments, and reached for a second charge when the regimental standard-bearer, Yaren Kel, bellowed the castellan's orders for every second company to stand down from the walls. The rear guard would assemble, and so the retreat of the imperial forces towards Castle Partox began. Some 10 companies had held to the last to allow the remainder of the 8th Cadian time to fall back. These brave 3,000 troops were to abandon their position at the last possible moment. But something went wrong. They were encircled, cut off, and eventually overrun and captured. A solar day later, the imperial forces learned of the fate of the men captured at Kasar Geher. They were ritually disemboweled before the imperial positions on the Vilkas line. The effect upon imperial morale was utterly devastating, and it was all the commissars could do to contain the air of defeat that soon settled over many units. As the Battle of Cadia reached towards its climax, the will of its defenders hung on the knife's edge. Death of Macaria. It was a fool's dream to hope the planet killer could be found before it was brought to bear upon Imperial forces. Without warning, it appeared in the orbit over the world of Macaria in the Cadian system. Though many could scarcely believe it, the world was destroyed by the massive vessel. It was lost. And with it, millions of the Emperor's loyal and faithful subjects, dead at the hands of Abbadon the despoiler, and his most fearsome and despicable weapon. Utter dread now descended upon the Cadian High Command. Despite the many successes won by Imperial forces, many Cadian officers had come to believe that the war might not be won in the short term. Where at first the Imperial forces had fought to repulse the assault of the despoiler, to deny Abbadon's footholds upon their worlds, they now fought to keep the forces of chaos from simply overwhelming them entirely. This was a grim paradigm, and one of the imperial forces were not ready to accept. They believed Abbadon dare not destroy Cadia using his planet killer, or the Blackstone Fortress, as the fortress world's ancient Xenos-built pylons were reckoned intrinsic to the continuous stability of the Cadian Gate's passage out of the Eye of Terror, and deeper into Imperial space. So the Imperium defenders decided that they would stand and hold at Cadia, no matter the cost. Wait, I already read this one. It was only that Macaria died. Oh well. Battle of Kasir Partox. The valiant Imperial defenders of Cadia made their final stand upon the ramparts of Kasir Partox against the forces of chaos arrayed against them. A massive force of the arch-enemy stood to assault the valiant Imperial defenders. The fortress city was protected by a scant 23rd regiments of the Cadian shock troops. Alongside the regiments of Cadia stood a host of units drawn from the worlds near and far, such as the Knovians, Gondorites, Mordants, Thracians, Yorans, and 1,000 more. The battle brothers of the Adeptus Astartes were also counted amongst the Imperial defenders, including the chapters of the Dark Angels, Space Wolves, Ultramarines, Doom Eagles, and many more that are not named in Imperial records. There are also many other servants of the God Emperor present, including the Battle Sisters of the Orders Militant of the Adepta Sororitas, the mighty Grey Knights, scores of Inquisitors, the Siege Dreadnoughts of the Order Reductor. Interesting. The mighty God Machine of the Collegia Titanica, and the Mechanicus' own cybernetic Skitari warriors. And among them all, the confessors of the Imperial cult, made their way, admonishing each and every man and woman to hold truth to the Emperor. But the Imperial defenders' number paled in comparison to those arrayed against them. Even from atop the mighty walls of the Castellum, it was observed that not a single square meter of ground was not held by the defenders or trodden upon by the enemy. It seemed as if every twisted denizen of the Eye of Terror had converged before the walls of Castel Partox. In the ensuing slaughter, the Imperials were forced to abandon Castel Partox and retreat towards the Caucasian Sea, where they hoped to make their final stand at Castel Galan. With Castel Partox fallen, the Imperial commander and control structure was demolished. The Imperial retreat from Castel Partox saw the most intense fighting of the 13th Black Crusade, with many thousands of lives given up so that the bulk of the Imperial forces might escape. The Imperial forces managed to make it to the Caucasia Sea, leaving behind thousands of dead, their bodies defiled by the blasphemous Chaos Horde. The Imperial Guard forces fled aboard transport ships across the Caucasian Sea, forced to abandon the bulk of their heavy equipment. One of the last groups to leave was the ecclesiarchal delegation, whose thousands of preachers had attended to the spiritual well-being of Imperial forces throughout the fighting withdrawal from the Partox. Some of these remained in the port, determined to preach the word of the Emperor until the very end, and their sonorous chants at the time were set to drown out even the thunderous explosions of enemy artillery. A company of space marines from the subjugators, whose number had been so reduced during their participation in the defense of Cadia, so as to threaten the very survival of their chapter, chose to also make a final stand there, vowing to evacuate only when all else was lost. Imperial Guard engineers planted munition at the heart of the port in order to ensure its destruction. The Battle of Cadia in Space and Stalemate. The Imperial fleet in orbit of Cadia above the valiant Imperial defenders on the ground was also gathered for its final stand, determined to gain time for the Eldar led by Farseer Ultran to board the Blackstone Fortress and disable it from within. If the Xenos proved successful, the Imperial forces might live to fight another day. Should they fail, the world of Cadia and all who stood upon it would be scoured away by the power of the warp unleashed upon its surface by the Blackstone fortresses moving into orbit above them. This had been Abbadon's plan all along in launching the 13th Black Crusade. Everything had led to this particular moment. Soon the battle in orbit was underway. True to their word, the Eldar's potent fleet fought side by side with the vessels of the Imperial Navy. The toll taken upon these combined forces of order was fearsome indeed, but its desperate endeavor was worthy of the greatest of sacrifices, for failure meant that the Cadian gate would lie open for Abbadon to launch his campaign against Terra, and succeed where his master Horus had once failed. The details of the battle in orbit that ultimately saw the Blackstone Fortress defeated are difficult to piece together, in the wake of the chaos caused to the Cadian High Command by Imperial retreat from Castel Partox. Admiral Quarren, who commanded the Imperial fleet that defended Cadia, reported that the bulk of his fleet was destroyed, many vessels having paid the ultimate price to ensure the Farseer of Ultwi the time necessary to complete his vital mission. It appeared that the Farseer's vessel, the Ishara, penetrated deep through the Chaos Fleet's lines, many of his sister warships being destroyed in action. Once close enough to do so, Ultron boarded the Blackstone Fortress and has not been seen or heard from since. At the height of this battle, it is reported that a fleet of Necron vessels appeared as if from nowhere and assaulted both the Blackstone Fortress and the Chaos Warfleet. So confused and incomplete are the Imperial records of this engagement that the Cadian High Command may never piece together the true details of how victory was won in orbit. Regardless of their reasons for doing so, the Necron ships forced the Blackstone Fortress to disengage from its approach on Cadia, and contact with it was lost soon after as it fled soon after as it fled the Cadian system. The last Imperial forces knew of what had happened to the so-called Talisman of Vow was reported by a psyker attached to the Cadian High Command's general staff, Lieutenant Fortuna, who was struck down with a vision of Farsia Ultran trapped within a shimmering crystal, his soul scream echoing throughout the warp. No doubt the Imperial seers and savants would be looking to unravel this mystery for many years to come. Yet the final outcome of the Battle of Cadia, no matter how it had been arrived at, was clear. The forces of chaos had seized a large portion of the surface of Cadia, but the Imperial and Eldar victory in orbit forced the Chaos Warfleet to retreat back towards the Eye of Terror, giving the Imperium naval superiority in the Cadian system, and the broader Cadian Gate. It provided the servants of the Emperor with the ability to keep the forces of chaos contained on the surface of Cadia, where ground operations slowly ground to a stalemate, with neither side able to make headway against the other. While the Imperium possessed air superiority, the forces of chaos' sheer numbers prevented them from being dislodged from their occupied territory. Should the second chaos assault come and break the Imperial blockade, there was little chance that the Emperor's faithful would be able to hold the fortress wall without further reinforcements. Outcome of the initial siege. Darkness descends. A limited chaos victory. Where is the Cadian and the Rhino? Where is the Vox that was blaring? They have passed like drop pods from a Dauntless, like wind on a Cacodicea sea. The day come down in the waste behind the hives, to shadow. How did it come to this? Lord Castellan Creed on the eve of the final assault on Cadia. Darkness had fallen across 100 worlds, and for the defenders of the Cadian Gate, the pure light of day now seems but a distant memory. Though the forces of Abbadon the Despoiler were denied the ultimate prize of the fall of Cadia after the first phase of the 13 Black Crusade, Abbadon's hordes have gained a foothold upon the world of mankind for the first time in 10,000 standard years, and none can see them being repelled for many years to come. Abbadon and his Council of Three have outmaneuvered and outfought the forces of the Imperium at almost every turn. Corpses litter the battlefield in their millions, yet millions more still stand beleaguered against a foe that knows no mercy and whose only goal is the utter destruction of all who stand before them. The bleak moors of Cadia have been reduced to a barren, crater-pocked wasteland, blasted by orbital torpedoes, super heavy artillery, and the massive footfalls of Titans. The Vilkas and Under defense lines have collapsed under the relentless pressure of a million frenzied chaos cultists, traitors, and mutants, and the Cadian Sector High Command has been forced to relocate to Kasar Galan on the far side of the Cadiz Sea. Though the Imperial Navy is in control of their inner system, space lanes of the Cadian sector, the forces of chaos still maintain a powerful presence in the skies. Directly above Cadia, that is capable of challenging the Imperial fleet, since the Imperial orbit defenses fell in the opening days of the 13 Black Crusade. The defenders of Cadia are now deployed on the Kasr Galan and throughout the wastes, resolute that not a backward step shall be taken. The order has been given. Stand at Cadia, or damn the Imperium of mankind to the depredations of chaos for eternity. The long-held dominance of the Imperium de Segmentum Obscuris has been decisively shattered. Chaos forces roam freely on the once proud worlds of Scarcus, Agrippina, and even within the Cadian system. Whole worlds have fallen to the tide of disorder that has swept across the sectors of the Segmentum. Abbadon's 13 Black Crusade appears to have been a modest success, although he cannot claim complete dominion over the Cadian pylons. The damage and chaos inflicted upon the Imperium will have severely weakened its activities within the Segmentum long into the new millennium. commanded by the shadowy triad, the Council of Chaos Champions that controls the Planet Killer, and groups of dedicated tacticians of the servants of the ruinous powers have come away with a win. It is a slim win, but a win nonetheless. The desperate actions of a few heroes within the Imperial hierarchy have, however, held the forces of chaos at bay in several sectors and star systems, claiming outright victory in the most of the outlying sectors and preventing total catastrophe for the Imperial forces in the inner sectors of the segmentum. Though Abbadon's final goal of smashing through the Cadian Gate was ultimately unsuccessful, the advances made by his forces have gained him much more than was initially realized. His retinue of Chosen, led by Devram Korda, the tyrant of Sarora, returned to his side in the closing days of the war, bringing with them two individuals who had journeyed to the center of the Eye of Terror. Together with the Chaos Sorcerer Igitmor the Deceiver, this is another one of those ugly names like in the Dorobutian heresy, they presented Abbadon with a Heart of Chaos, a powerful Chaos artifact that Zafariston, the Chaos Sorcerer who has served as one of Abbadon's chosen, had long claimed could not exist. It is known that whatever this guy's name is, now stands at Abbadon's right hand, while Zarafastion's status remains a mystery. Cadian Sector. The fortress world of Cadia still stands, but she stands alone, a failing beacon of the Emperor's light flickering against the encroaching night. Total war has come to the Segmentum Obscurus, and all hopes of repelling the invaders have been dashed for the moment. The Imperium must now consolidate its grip upon those worlds of the Segmentum it still holds, and prepare to fight a war that will not end within the lifetime of any of its combatants. While Cadia still stands, humanity has reason to hope, but Abbadon the Despoiler has finally reached what he had failed to do on 12 previous occasions. Over more than 10,000 standard years, he has breached the Cadian Gate, and none can now hold back the eventual tide of chaos he will seek to unleash upon the Imperium of Mankind, of course. The forces of chaos won a small, if insignificant, victory over the Imperium and the Eldar, capturing a number of Imperial worlds in the sector beyond the Cadian Gate, for the first time since the Horus Heresy. Cadia still stands, but only just, as most of the planet's surface belongs to chaos. The battle for Cadia will last centuries without aid, but if chaos gains headway in the space above Cadia, then the defenders will be doomed, especially with the Blackstone Fortress still lurking somewhere. Even without aid to the Imperial forces in orbit, there is a larger chance that simple supplies such as food will be unable to reach the defenders, and that defenders will eventually starve to death. No man, no space marine, fought harder to save Cadia than the Lord Castellan Creed. Although each Castellum level cut him deep, the fate of Creed proved unshakable. His victories could not easily be counted, but the numbers of the arch-enemy did not lessen, whereas each defeat drained the strength of the Imperial forces. Creed was forced first to give ground to preserve his forces, and then to abandon his favored mobile defense tactics in favor of defending fortified lines. His friend, Jalan Kel, was wounded, defending him from yet another Chaos champion, eager to make a name, and Creed was fatigued to the point of collapse, when finally the momentum of the Chaos forces ran out. The Inquisition fortress world of Nemesis Tessera, its existence supposedly unknown to all but the highest members of the Inquisition, came under fierce attack during Abbadon's 13th Black Crusade. The system surrounding the Inquisition fortress world experienced hitherto unknown level of civil insurrection that could not be explained without recourse to the malign influence of the ruinous powers. In one such incident, a previously peaceful sect of contemplative monks turned on the populace of the nearby planet Trionara, engaging in a series of bloody massacres across the planet's surface. Although Heretical strike teams were dispatched to quell these killing sprees, they discovered the barricaded monasteries to be full of corpses, the monks having chosen to end their lives in an orgy of self-mutilation. The monasteries were burned to the ground, the ruins sown with salt, and reconsecrated. While agents of the Inquisition policed the systems surrounding their fortress, many strange omens and portents were unearthed, all indicating great disasters. Many believed this simply to be foretelling of the invasion of Abbadon, but other, more cautious inquisitors believe it to be something more. These doomsayers were proved correct when the blind servers of Nemesis Tessera detected unauthorized psychic activity within the depths of the fortress itself. Inquisitor Van Hel, a radical inquisitor who delved too deeply into mysteries best left alone, had been seduced by the whispered promises of the ruinous powers. And only the timely intervention of Inquisitor Ciaro prevented the warp rift of cataclysmic proportions from developing. At almost the exact same time, a determined force of Chaos Space Marines launched an attack on the Inquisition fortress and laid siege to it for many months. Only the timely arrival of the Space Wolves saved the beleaguered inquisitorial forces, and the combined forces of the Inquisition and the Sons of Rus were finally able to repulse the attack. The reason why the Space Wolves abandoned their previous station to deploy throughout the Nemesis Tessera subsector remains a mystery. Scarus Sector. During Abbadon's 13th Black Crusade, the War Master of Chaos Undivided recruited massive warbands of orks to act as mercenary auxilia to his Chaos Legions. Following up on terror raids and cunning feints by the Night Lords and Alpha Legion, many of the orks banded together into ever-growing tribes that declared themselves to be part of the Green Crusade. The unstoppable force of the Crusade inundated the Scarus sector, Scar-Uz to the orks, battering down Imperial defenses with sheer doggedness and not without a little help from the Chaos Space Marines, particularly those of the Night Lords and the Black Legion. Now the orcs ruled both the worlds of Lelthi 9, or 11, and the Forge world of Mordax Prime, along with most of Immibrium and Ulnat. Gurdun and Nisas, Stromolo, stand on the brink of anarchy, and the weapon forges of Mordax Prime, rechristened Mordaka by the orcs, are infested with Lutas of the Death Skull clan, a truly terrifying prospect to the devotees of the Machine God, who know full well the depths of blasphemy against the Omnissiah to which these barbaric Xenos will sink. Battle survivors speak of hundreds of gargants being built from the debris of war by enslaved servitors and their brutal green-skinned overseers. The squat, menacing form of more gargant construction sites climbing over the plains of Mordax Dairy as orc mech boys race to be the first to complete their war machines. Imperial strategists now regard the Green Crusade as a full-scale orc war, as commanding warlords remaining unknown, but it will later appear that Gazgul and Nazdrek are not among them. Only Thracian Primaris holds firm against the Green Crusade, bolstered first by the intervention of a Black Templars crusade, and later by the stalwart defense mounted by the Salamanders chapter. The situation is grim in the Scarus sector, and none can see an end to the infestation given the dire situation across the region. Schelus was the homeworld of the renegade Space Marines of the Sons of Malice chapter, and was declared perdita at the time of the chapter turned upon the Imperium. Or was I? Yes. A cold, desolate place, Schelus is a home to the savage and barbaric tribes from which the Sons of Malice recruited their number. Though reports from the front line at Schelus are unclear on the subject, reliable sources state that the invading force of Chaos joined with the native tribes, establishing a potential huge power base within a short space of time at the strategical vital location. The forces of the Imperium were in no position to oppose this state of affairs in the initial stages of the invasion, as every available Imperial Guard regiment was committed elsewhere, and none could relocate swiftly enough to oppose Abbadon's plans for Schellus. However, Abbadon's plans were in fact opposed, and very soon the Imperium was in full control of Schellus, having slaughtered the invaders without mercy. The exact identity of the Imperial forces that liberated the system is unclear, though this is far from unusual in a region within which uncounted millions of soldiers are fighting, with more arriving every single day. That the liberators were space marines is known, though the exact chapter is not. It was reported that several chapters were located within a short warp jump to Schellus in the days leading up to its liberation, including the Night Watch, the Subjugators, and the Howling Griffins. Nothing has been heard of from any Imperial force in the area, and it is suspected by some that a Space Marine chapter has claimed Schellus as its homeworld by right of conquest. In the current climate, none of Segmentum Obscurus High Command would argue against such a move. Bellis Corona Sector. The Imperial forces have largely held at Bellis Corona, the location of the greatest shipyard of the Imperium, which suffered the worst excesses of Tyranid's Splinter Hive Fleet, and the horrific plagues bestowed upon its hive cities by the Death Guard Traitor Legion. At the height of the invasion, something truly unexpected occurred. Defenders in the outlying system reported contact with Tyranid organisms. At first, individual vanguard organisms such as lictors, but soon entire broods of gene stealers and hormogons. A splinter fleet of Hive Fleet Leviathan, a Tyranid fleet known to be attacking up to the galactic plane, was taking advantage of the mass destruction initiated by the chaotic invasion to gain a foothold in the strategically vital Imperial space. Faced with both the pestilent forces of the Death Guard and the voracious hordes of Tyranids, who were unlike the human defenders, immune to the Plague God's blessings, the forces of the Imperium were hard-pressed to defend the vital worlds of the sector. It was the intervention of the forces of Eldar of the Ultwi craft world, and then the orbital bombardment of Laurentix that allowed the force of the Imperium to fight back, despite the disastrous ambush of forward elements of Battlefleet Solar at the Baristan Prime warp jump point. Subiaco Diablo saw the Covenant of the Order of the Ermine Mantle hold against overwhelming odds, though at terrible cost, before being relieved by a host of Adeptas Sororitas, units drawn from across the region, thanks to the leadership of the renowned canoness Astra. Agrippina Sector. The industrial heartland of the Cadian Gate lies in ruin. Though the Imperial Navy controls its space, many worlds of the Agrippina Sector are lost to anarchy and destruction. By the end of the war, the planets Albitern, Amistel, Lelitar, Mom's Reach, Ultor, and Yavar lay in ruins, and a number of other key star systems hung in the balance. Though Agrippina itself still stands without the agri worlds of Yayor, Ultor, and Denethor, its populace may yet starve to death, and without the vital materials provided by the hive worlds of Albitern, Amistel, and Tabor, its mighty forges may yet fall silent. The so-called Herald of Nurgle, Typhus, of the Death Guard Traitor Legion, has claimed the now blasted world of Ulthor as his own realm, and the nightmare visions of 1,000 astropaths tell of the birth of a new demon world within the realm of mankind. Further, unconfirmed reports state that one of the Black Fortresses was destroyed by Necron raiders off the shoulder of the Lustia Belt. Senior members of the Ordo Xenos are en route to the area, and Death Watch strike cruisers are already engaged in ensuring no vessel other than their own enter the region. Striding through the blackened ruins of the ravaged worlds of the Imperium, crushing the bones of the slain beneath his Chaos Terminator armor, and spreading the vilest afflictions of Nurgle, Typhus was the embodiment of terror, a cursed thing too terrible to name. His ship, the Terminus Est, and supporting Plague Fleet were one of their largest Chaos battle groups remaining active throughout the war, and allowed Typhus to terrorize war zone after war zone. It was on the world of Ulthor in the Agrippina sector that Typhus unleashed his greatest sorceries, exhibiting the greatest favor in which he is held by Nergal. The once verdant Agri-world was utterly twisted and corrupted. The taint of the herald devolved whatever life it found, rendering it down into a formless sea of putrescence. Seeing his handiwork, Typhus took the nascent demon world for his own, a stronghold beyond the Cadian gate, from which he can bring terror to the other worlds of the Imperium at his leisure. Sentinel Worlds. The barren Sentinel worlds in the southwest quadrant of the Eye of Terror have always been thought to be a collection of mostly featureless rock held together by specific gravitational anomalies. The Adeptus Mechanicus have done much to discourage development in this region, due to their facilities stationed on Hydra Cordatus, a relatively unremarkable planet holding a potent secret. It was one of the few locations in the galaxy where the Adeptus Mechanicus stored its tides of space marine gene seed, in this case genetic material drawn from the Imperial Fist chapter. The planet consisted of only a spaceport and a single large citadel and manufactorum complex, known as the Tor Christo. The Tor Christo was a large star-shaped fortress connected to a smaller half-star fortress built into the side of a nearby mountain. The citadel had a large garrison of Imperial Guard troops and even a small Titan legion contingent from the Legio Ignatum to protect its precious contents. Remaining undisturbed for centuries, there were unconfirmed reports of a great Iron Warrior invasion into the system, preceding even the Hive Teriax disaster in the opening phase of the 13th Black Crusade. During the siege of the large Imperial Citadel and Manufactorum complex on Hydra Cordatus, a faint psychic beacon was transmitted from the surface of the planet. The Iron Warrior's warband's flagship, Stonebreaker, was sent to the star system's warp translation point in order to intercept any Imperial reinforcements. But this action allowed an Imperial Fist company to slip past the flagship and infiltrate the planet's surface and reinforce the besieged Mechanicus garrison. Inevitably, the Iron Warriors emerged triumphant. They defeated the Imperial forces defending Tor Christo as well as the Imperial Fist Company, having greatly pleased the Chaos Gods through his monumental victory over the Imperium. The commanding warsmith of the attack on Hydra Cordatus was ascended to become a demon prince. During the opening stages of the 13th Black Crusade, the Sentinel worlds had little in the way of full-scale engagement, although a node in the webway stationed above these worlds saw a lot of conflict between the Eldar and their chaotic enemies. The most notable development emerged from this unregarded backwater sector, just as the water reached its peak with hordes of silver Necron warriors emerging from hidden tombs on the 4 planets surrounding Hydra Cordatus in a rough pyramidal pattern. The Imperial forces stationed nearby feared the worst, but were amazed when the Necrons fell upon the warriors of Chaos, turning the tide in the favor of the Imperium. Since that time, the increased Necron activity in the sector has prevented any Imperial forces from capitalizing upon these victories, and remote orbital pick captures have even revealed several structures almost identical to the Cadian pylons sprouting across the landscapes of these 4 Sentinel worlds. Chinchar subsector. We didn't even talk about Chinchar until now. Imperial forces largely ignored the mostly uninhabited Chinchar subsector in the early stages of the war, though the forces garrisoned throughout the region were hard-pressed to contain the initial surge of Chaos invaders. Reports of the increased Chaos activity drew more forces there as the war went on, and the Eldar forces of Ulthwi fought hard and spilled much blood in order to wrestle control of the subsector from the ruinous powers. Ulthwi's strike forces struck at the key points within the system surrounding Chinkar, to deny the forces of Abbadon any cohesion to their armies. Striking behind the lines of the main Chaos thirst, precious resources were diverted from the forces of Chaos front line to deal with the raiding Eldar in the rear. These forces dispatched to deal with the Eldar were themselves ambushed and destroyed piecemeal. Such superiority brought with it an arrogant belief that the Eldar strike forces were invulnerable, but such was not to be the case, as Ahriman, the Thousand Suns Chaos Sorcerer, wove powerful magics to disrupt the path of the webway, twisting it and rippling portions of it asunder. Much was the lamentation of Ultwi, as many of the craft world's strike forces were trapped forever in the webway, or lost in the haunted depths of the warp. While Ultwi reeled from these terrible losses, the Chaos forces pressed their attack and launched devastating counterattack against Imperial forces, particularly those based on Balzac. The Imperial troops were in danger of being overrun completely, before being suddenly and decisively aided by Eldar emerging from the shimmering webway portals. These mysterious benefactors asked nothing in return for their aid, and vanished without a word of explanation. As more and more reports were collated, it appeared that these silent Eldar had appeared virtually simultaneously throughout the subsector, effectively stemming the Chaos attack. As the Chaos forces reeled, the vengeful Eldar, combined with the might of the Imperial forces, were able to rout the followers of the Dark Gods from the Chinkar subsector completely. The Relicators. As a result of the actions of the recalcitrant chapter known as the Relicators, and their conflict with the Inquisition over the use of chaotic artifacts, the Relicators were judged to be extremis diabolus, their lives forfeit. The decision was swift and unanimous, and the chapter was ultimately declared excommunicate traitoris by the Order of Heretics. The Relictors had turned from the Emperor's light and were to be hunted down and destroyed, their gene seed wiped from the galaxy, and all records of their deeds expunged from the Imperial history. The Relicators had lost a great many of their number during the 13th Black Crusade, and their mobile fortress monastery, Ramilis-class Starfront, had been severely damaged during their capture of the world of Finhet. It had taken all the skill of the chapter masters of the fleet to secretly move them to anchor in the Telos system, where they attempted to recover their strength and make use of the knowledge they had gleaned from the dark treasure they had recovered within the Diomedes archive. The chapter was all but destroyed in a cunning ambush by the Ordo Malus Chamber Militant, the Grey Knights, under the command of Inquisitor Xiaro, whom the Relicators had left for dead on the agri world of Fremas. After assaulting their fortress monastery, the assembled inquisitorial fleet hammered the dying remains of the Relicators' Starfront with concentrated fire from their powerful gun batteries. Ramilis Starfront is a massive edifice and took time to fully destroy, but the Inquisition left only when every trace of the Relicators was reduced to dust. Only a few hundred Relicators Astartes survived this assault, and it is suspected these renegade Space Marines have fled to the relative safety of the Eye of Terror. It is currently unknown whether those survivors have thrown in their lot with the forces of Chaos and became full-fledged Chaos Space Marines, or whether they continue their struggle of trying to turn the dark powers of the Chaos Gods against them and their servants for the good of humanity, much like other well-known renegade Space Marine chapter, the Soul Drinkers. Dark Angels. Caliban was the site of many bitter battles throughout the war, and the Dark Angels chapter was forced to defend the ruins of their former homeworld against the blasphemous hordes of Abbadon the Despoiler, who were intent upon desecrating the holy ground. But despite the vindictive campaign of lies and profanity conducted by the heretic known to his followers as the Voice of the Emperor, which were seemingly designed to draw the Dark Angels into pointless battles away from the main fronts, they did in fact prove invaluable in many conflicts across the region. Despite the generally held view that the Dark Angels and their successors, collectively known as the Unforgiven, fought exclusively and selfishly for the ruins of Caliban, while Cadia burned. At the close of the war, Caliban was firmly in the hands of the Dark Angels, its secret safe for the time being. The Dark Angels had not only held Caliban against continuous attacks, but were able to counter the activities of a number of the fallen angels, better known as the Fallen, The rogue brethren, who the chapter and its unforgiven successors have relentlessly hunted to the exclusion of all other considerations for 10 millennia. The so-called voice of the Emperor put much effort into sowing disunity amongst the defenders of the Cadian Gate, seeding doubt as to just what the chapter was hiding amongst the frozen ruins of its homeworld. Rumors abound that the Dark Angels have since captured the voice of the Emperor himself, only for this mysterious heretic to escape his prison en route to the Tower of Angels. Other rumors suggest that the Lord Castellan Creed now harbors a deep resentment towards the chapter, whose presence he feels might have proved critical in the defense of Cadia in the most desperate phases of the war, were the chapter not focusing its efforts upon Caliban. Having suffered the presence of the servants of the ruinous powers, the unholy places of the Caliban system have now been reconsecrated by the most senior interrogator chaplains of the chapter. And it is clear that whatever the result of the larger war, no devotee of chaos shall ever again approach within a light year of the Caliban system again. The mysterious leader of the fallen, Cypher, has been hunted by the Dark Angels and their successor chapters for 10,000 years. Though it is not known whether Cypher was encountered directly during the war, unconfirmed reports suggest chapter's interrogator chaplains captured as many as 8 fallen during the battles around the Caliban system, more than have been captured in such a short period in many thousands of standard years. Further reports link Cypher to the mysterious voice of the Emperor on the world of Lelitar, who, it is rumored, was captured by the Dark Angels during the fighting, but whose cell was found empty upon the prison's ship returned to the Tower of Angels aboard the Dark Angel's vast, mobile fortress monastery known as the Rock. Azrael, the Supreme Grand Master of the Dark Angels, was notably absentee at the Council of Chapter Masters that elected Logan Grimnar, their head at the start of the 13th Black Crusade. Azrael led the Dark Angels in the so-called Unforgiven chapters, according to his own inscrutable strategy. The only time he is known to have stood beside the other Imperial forces was when he held the company of Dark Angels upon Xerxia, where he joined with Lord Castellan Creed and his 8th Cadian Regiment to repel a force of Black Legionnaires from the world's High Basilica, though Abbadon succeeded in his sacrilegious mission to desecrate the High Altar as part of some dedication to the ruinous powers that would guarantee the success of the 13th Black Crusade. Azrael was instrumental in repelling the invaders, for a time at least. Space Lanes. The Imperial Navy had fought with courage and vigor throughout the war, ruthlessly taking the battle to the arch-enemy, wherever it encountered them. Admiral Quarren had been hailed as a true hero of the Imperium for his masterful defense of the space lanes, was all that stood between the survival and utter defeat for the Imperium. Though Cadia was besieged, the Imperial Navy continued to command its space, and the space of all the sectors surrounding the Eye of Terror, and was able to offer support to the beleaguered forces on the ground. The only question is whether the rapid redeployment of almost the entirety of Battlefleet Gothic, along with a substantial proportion of Battlefleet Solar, will leave the Imperial Navy dangerously overstretched elsewhere and unable to maintain the level of operation required to hold the lines at the Cadian Gate. The Tau Empire. The Tau made several major expansions to their empire over the course of the 13th Black Crusade. If any one race or faction can be said to have gained from the wholesale destruction unleashed by Abbadon the Despoiler's campaign, it was the Tau. With imperial attention elsewhere, the local Tyranid and Orc menace temporarily contained, Tau's... I'm gonna have to take this one back a moment. With imperial attention was elsewhere, the local Tyranid and Orc menace temporarily contained, the Tau settlement colonies and pioneer teams reached far and wide into the outlying systems of the eastern fringe in the Damocles Gulf, the Perdu's Rift, and much further afield. Although the encroachment on imperial space had been relatively minor, the Tau have established no fewer than 5 third sphere expansion colony systems in a hollow around their existing sept worlds. These areas of expansion are already being referred to as the Third Sphere colonies by the diplomats of the Tau water caste, and are rumored to include an unprecedented number of human auxiliaries. That the Imperium's attention is focused elsewhere is no doubt of comfort to those humans who have pledged their support to the burgeoning Tau Empire. The Third Sphere expansion was only finally halted in the 99th year of the 31st millennia, as a result of the Zeiss campaign waged against the Tau by an alliance of space marines as described above. The Webway. The Chaos Sorcerer Ahriman found himself ripped open. The Chaos Sorcerer Ahriman himself ripped open the walls of the Webway with information torn from the mind of Inquisitor Bronislaw Slevak. His plan to breach the fastness of the Black Library came dangerously close to success. But the combined forces of the mysterious Harlequin and an Ulthway strike force kept him from its gates. In a daring move, the Harlequins of the Red Mask freed Inquisitor Xevak from his captivity aboard Ahriman's ship. The Impossible Fortress. Though what they have done with him since is at present unknown, it is believed by Imperial astropaths that he may be incarcerated by the Eldar within the Webway. The Eldar have resealed the Webway against all invaders, expelling the traitor space marines of the Thousand Suns Legion, and rebuffed their own wayward kin, the Dark Eldar, back to their shadow realm of Komarag. For now, the hidden places of the Eldar and the terrible secrets they hide are safe from the predations of the lesser races. Those war zones only accessible through the Webway are now held by the Eldar, including the ancient crone world of Belial IV, a former Jew in a once mighty galaxy-spawning Eldar empire. Belial, I don't know why we're doing this world. Aeons ago, the crone world of Belial IV was the capital world of the ancient Eldar empire. Deep into the heart of the Eldar homelands, this verdant paradise was all but obliterated when the cataclysmic fall of the Eldar stripped away thousands of years of culture and beauty and replaced it with madness, desolation, and evil. Belial IV became a dust-strewn wreck of demon-infested ruins and crackling, baleful skies. Magun Ra, a Phoenix Lord, and therefore a veteran of Webway travel, braved the depths of the Eye of Terror on a pilgrimage to the shattered Crone worlds, intending to find the faction of Eldar he believed trapped within the Eye of Terror since the fall. Taking with him a few of his favorite disciples, Magun Ra eventually reached the hex system of Belial IV. What he found there he would not speak of, and he was not seen again until he appeared upon Ulthway to form the infamous Eldar strike forces, filled with renewed energy and determination to defeat the forces of chaos. Towards the end of the 13th Black Crusade, many of the Eldar departed from war zones in Imperial space and gathered upon Belial IV under Magun Ra's command. They took the fight to the indigenous chaos forces with such unremitting fury that vast areas were reclaimed by the Eldar. The battle also raged around Belial IV in the labyrinthian dimension of the Webway, but it seemed that without the guidance of their leaders, the Ultimi Strike Force suffered heavy losses to both the Dark Eldar and the Thousand Suns. The otherworldly guardians of the Black Library, fearing for their shadowy craft world's safety, revealed hitherto unknown capillaries of the Webway to the Ultwi Eldar, enabling them to not only escape from the net drawing around them, but to stage a series of ambushes that broke the deadlock and turned the tide of the war in the Webway once and for all. The final, most decisive twist to this peculiar theater of war came when a demon horde led a counterattack against Eldar consolidating their hold on the Crone worlds. As sudden as it was devastating, to the great shock of the Eldar below, the withered and broken craft world of Altasar, thought lost to the warp for more than 10,000 Terran years, drifted into orbit above the Crone worlds. Hundreds of pallid, ghost-like Eldar joined their brethren on the field of battle, throwing back the demon tide with wave after wave of silent, grim warriors. Since that great victory, Belial IV has been reclaimed by the Eldar. What this and the reappearance of the lost of the loss of Talansar, both for the Eldar race remains to be seen. It's gonna be a long one about Eldars, isn't it? The immortal Phoenix Lord Magnu-Ra took a vital role in the deciding fate of the Eldar over the course of the 13th Black Crusade. Responsible for the creation of the Ulthuan Strike Force, Magnu-Ra and his elite Blackguard fought across every sector by cunning use of the webway. He ultimately led the Eldar to victory, even in the heart of the Eye of Terror, and after repelling Dark Eldar raids on Xerxia, fought alongside Lord Castellan Creed against Abbadon's forces at the Basilica Dufax. It is believed by many Farseers that the reappearance of the shadowy craft world of Altasar and its ghost-like inhabitants was purely due to the iron determination of the Phoenix Lord to locate and redeem his once-lost brethren. Oh god. Eidolon. The mysterious world of Eidolon, deep into the heart of the Eye of Terror, is one of the most remote and peculiar of the demon worlds, fought upon during the 13th Black Crusade. Divided into several continents where a different chaos power reigns over each, the battle zones of Eidolon present a panoply of strange and excruciating ways to die. Its shifting landscape defy all reason, and although it was once a beautiful maiden world of the Eldar, it has changed so irrevocably that no real trace of its former glory exists. Nonetheless, the victories won by the Eldar, notably the Eldar of the Belial-Tan craft world, have established several enclaves of sanity in the roiling seas of possibilities that characterize Eidolon. The Eldar hope that one day these islands can grow and become stable, and that eventually the secrets of Eidolon can be reclaimed. Fate of Eldrad Ultran. For the Farseer Eldrad Ultran, the most gifted and powerful of all Eldar seers, the onset of the 13th Black Crusade meant that the twisting fortress of possibilities through which he normally walked at will were denied to him. Binding his exceptional scrying abilities, his one certainty was that the darkness stood ready to engulf him, and possibly even his homeworld of Ulthuan. After the formation of the Ulthuan Strike Force, Eldrad divided many parts of his consciousness into shimmering waystones. As for Eldrad Ultran's fate, this bravest and most noble leader of the Eldar since before the birth of Slaanesh has perished. In a last-ditch effort to stop the Blackstone Fortress, talisman of value controlled by Abbadon, from crushing the Imperial defenders of Cadia, he and a select few warlocks teleported aboard. Within minutes, all the warlocks were drained of life by the fortress's bottomless thirst, and when Eldrad reached out to try to touch the Eldar spirit that he believed compromised the core of the fortress's sentience, he found only an extension of the hideous mind of Slaanesh, she who thirsts, the great enemy of the Eldar. As Eldrad realized his folly, his soul was devoured by the Chaos God inhabiting the Blackstone Fortress, and the greatest Farseer of the Eldar was lost. However, a handful of waystones of the that Eldrad had created still remained active, causing the Eldar to believe that Eldrad is still alive, but trapped somewhere in the warp, perhaps at the mercy of Slaanesh. And this has been the 13th Black Crusade. This is like the most non-canonical version of it. Is the one that doesn't have Abbadon using the Blackstone Fortress to destroy Cadia. Unfortunately, it's the version that does not give us the phrase Cadia stands. But it's still awesome nonetheless.